Billionaire's triplets drove every maid away until a single mom tamed them. The gilded doors of Manhattan's most exclusive penthouse slammed shut for the 13th time in 6 months. Another nanny fled in tears, designer heels clicking frantically down marble stairs as 3 5-year-old boys pressed their faces against bulletproof windows, grinning like tiny devils. Billionaire Daniel Lawson stood among the wreckage of his dining room, crystal-shattered caviar, splattered across Persian rugs, knowing his empire meant nothing if he couldn't tame his own sons. Welcome to today's story that will take you on an emotional roller coaster through love, heartbreak, and redemption. Stay with me until the very end to see how this incredible journey unfolds, and please comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled around the world. The October rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lawson penthouse like nature's own judgment, each droplet exploding against the glass in synchronized fury. 43 floors above the streets of Manhattan, Daniel Lawson stood motionless in his study, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the storm-darkened sky. The Forbes magazine on his mahogany desk bore his photograph on the cover. Tech titan at 35, the Lawson legacy. But the man staring at his reflection in the rain-streaked window looked like he'd aged a decade in the past year. "Sir." The tentative voice belonged to Margaret, his longtime housekeeper, a woman whose unflappable demeanor had weathered everything from hostile corporate takeovers to his late wife's cancer battle. But even Margaret's composure cracked when it came to the triplets. "The agency is sending someone new today." Daniel didn't turn around. "Number 14. 13, sir. We've had 13 nannies since—" Margaret's voice caught. They both knew she meant since Victoria died. Since the boys' laughter turned to rage, since their angel faces learned to mask hearts full of pain. Since Daniel's world imploded, leaving him with 3 sons he didn't know how to reach, and a fortune that felt more like a curse with each passing day. "This one's different." Margaret continued, her tone carrying a note of desperate hope. "Single mother herself. References from families who say she worked miracles with difficult children." They all had references. Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless. Through the window, he watched pedestrians far below scurrying through the rain like ants. "What's her name?" "Emily Carter. She'll be here at 3. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed twice, its deep bronze notes echoing through the cavernous apartment. Somewhere in the maze of hallways, Daniel could hear the unmistakable sounds of his sons plotting their next campaign of terror, muffled whispers, stifled giggles, and what sounded suspiciously like duct tape being unrolled. "Sir, perhaps this time will be different." Daniel finally turned his steel-gray eyes, holding none of the warmth that had once made him Victoria's whole world. "Margaret, I've learned that hope is just disappointment waiting to happen." The housekeeper's weathered face creased with sympathy. She'd watched this man build a tech empire from his Columbia dorm room, seen him romance and marry the love of his life, celebrated when the triplets were born. She'd also held him the night Victoria's heart gave out, watched him transform from a devoted husband and father into this hollow version of himself. The boys need their mother." The words came out sharper than intended. Daniel rubbed his temples where a familiar headache was building. "But since I can't give them that, we'll settle for someone who can survive them long enough to provide basic care." Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but the elevator's distinctive chime cut her short. Through the penthouse's security system, they could see a woman stepping into the private elevator. Unlike the parade of perfectly coiffed, designer-clad candidates who'd preceded her, this one wore simple black slacks and a cream-colored sweater that had seen better days. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a worn leather bag instead of an expensive handbag. "That's her," Margaret whispered. Daniel studied the security monitor with the same intensity he once applied to market projections. Emily Carter looked to be in her late 20s, with an oval face dominated by intelligent green eyes. There was something in her expression, a quiet determination mixed with what looked like barely contained grief. She stood perfectly still in the elevator, hands clasped in front of her, staring straight ahead, as if preparing for battle. "She's too young," Daniel murmured. "She's 28, sir, and she's raising a 7-year-old daughter on her own." The elevator stopped at the 43rd floor. Through the apartment's elaborate speaker system, they could hear the soft ping of arrival followed by footsteps on marble. "Show her in," Daniel said, moving behind his desk like it was a fortress wall. "Let's get this over with." Margaret disappeared into the hallway, leaving Daniel alone with his doubts. Through the study's open door, he could hear voices, Margaret's formal introduction, then another voice responding. Emily Carter's voice was surprisingly warm, with just a hint of a southern accent softening her words. "The boys are in the family room," Margaret was saying. "I should warn you they can be quite spirited." "I've read their file," came the calm reply. "I understand they've been through something terrible." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Every nanny said they understood. They nodded sympathetically when briefed about Victoria's death, made appropriate noises about childhood trauma and adjustment difficulties. Then they met Ethan Mason and Luke, and understanding flew out the 43rd floor windows along with their composure. Footsteps approached the study. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Lawson, this is Emily Carter." The woman who entered Daniel's study moved with an easy grace that reminded him painfully of Victoria. But where his late wife had been all golden beauty and infectious laughter, Emily Carter possessed a quieter strength. Her green eyes met his directly, without the nervous flutter he'd grown accustomed to from job candidates trying to impress a billionaire. "Mr. Lawson." She stepped forward and extended her hand. "Thank you for considering me." Her handshake was firm, her palm slightly calloused, in a way that spoke of real work rather than spa treatments. She didn't comment on the opulent surroundings, didn't let her gaze linger on the original Picasso hanging behind his desk, or the wall of industry awards that proclaimed his success to the world. "Please sit." Daniel gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "I assume the agency briefed you on the situation." They did. Emily settled into the chair, her posture straight but relaxed. 3 5-year-old boys who lost their mother 11 months ago. 13 previous nannies, none lasting more than 3 weeks. A household staff that's described as challenging. That's a diplomatic way to put it. Daniel studied her face for signs of the anxiety that usually crept in around this point in the interview. "My sons have perfected the art of psychological warfare. The last nanny lasted 4 days before she was found crying in a supply closet, covered in what we later determined was a mixture of finger paint and oatmeal." Emily's expression didn't change. "How did they get her into the supply closet?" The question was so unexpected that Daniel almost smiled. Almost. "I beg your pardon." Was she hiding, or did they physically maneuver her there, because that tells me different things about their methods? She was hiding. Then they're strategic, not just destructive. They pushed her buttons until she broke, then gave her space to fall apart privately. That actually shows empathy. Daniel stared at her. In 11 months, no one had ever suggested his son's behavior showed empathy. Most people would call it cruel. Hurt people, Mr. Lawson, but they rarely hurt randomly. Emily leaned forward slightly. "May I ask about their mother?" Not the medical details, but what she was like with them. The familiar knife twisted in Daniel's chest. Why? Because whatever they're doing to drive away caregivers, they're doing it for a reason. Maybe they're protecting her memory. Maybe they're testing whether new people will abandon them too. Maybe they're just so angry at the world that anyone who walks into it becomes a target. Her voice softened. Or maybe all three. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying this woman, Sean, who spoke about his sons like she already understood them. Victoria she was magic with them. Patient when I would have lost my mind, creative when I would have given up. She could turn a tantrum into a game, a bedtime battle, into a story they begged to hear. She made everything fun, even discipline. And you, what about me? What are you like with them now? The question hit like a physical blow. Daniel felt his defenses slam into place. I provide for them. I ensure they have the best of everything: education, healthcare opportunities. That's not what I asked. Something in her tone, gentle but implacable, made Daniel's carefully constructed walls shake. I'm not good with them anymore. I don't know how to be. Everything I do reminds them of what they've lost, and everything they do reminds me of the same thing. Emily nodded slowly. Grief is like that. It builds walls between people who love each other most. You sound like you know something about it. I do. She didn't elaborate, and something in her expression warned him not to push. Mr. Lawson, I need to be honest with you. I'm not here because I need a job, though I do. I'm here because I think I can help your sons. What makes you so confident? Because I know what it's like to lose everything and have to keep going for a child who's counting on you. I know what it's like to be so angry at the world that you want to break everything in reach. And I know what it's like to meet someone who doesn't give up on you even when you're at your worst. Before Daniel could respond, a tremendous crash echoed through the penthouse, followed by what sounded like a small explosion. Margaret's voice, raised in distress, carried clearly through the apartment. Boys, come back here this instant. Emily stood immediately. May I? Daniel gestured toward the door, curious despite himself. Most candidates needed to be dragged to meet the boys, offering weak smiles and nervous laughter as they prepared for battle. Emily Carter walked toward the chaos like she was walking toward old friends. They found the family room in complete disarray. The coffee table was overturned, its contents scattered across the imported Italian marble. 3 small figures darted between furniture like commandos on a mission, their blonde hair catching the afternoon light as they dove for cover behind a leather sofa. Ethan, Mason, Luke. Margaret stood in the doorway, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. Your father has brought someone to meet you. We don't want to meet anyone. The voice belonged to Ethan, the oldest by 12 minutes and the undisputed leader of their operations. Tell her to go away. Yeah. Mason's head popped up from behind an armchair. We're busy. Busy doing what? Emily's voice cut through the chaos, calm and genuinely curious. The boys froze. In the sudden silence, Daniel could hear the rain still drumming against the windows, the distant hum of traffic far below, and his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Luke, the youngest and usually the shyest, peered around the edge of the sofa. His blue eyes, Victoria's eyes, fixed on Emily with suspicious interest. Who are you? I'm Emily. What are you busy doing? Making a fort, Luke said before his brothers could stop him. Emily looked around the demolished room with fresh eyes. This is a fort. Where's the entrance? There. Mason pointed to a gap between the overturned coffee table and the sofa. But it's secret, only members can enter. That makes sense. All the best forts have membership requirements. Emily walked closer, seemingly oblivious to the boys' obvious trap preparations. "What do you have to do to become a member?" The triplets exchanged glances. This wasn't how adults usually responded to their chaos. Adults yelled or pleaded or tried to bribe them with treats and new toys. They didn't ask reasonable questions about fort membership. "You have to pass 3 tests," Ethan announced, climbing out from behind the sofa. At 5, he already showed signs of inheriting his father's commanding presence, though currently that presence was somewhat undermined by the fact that he was wearing Batman pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. "What kind of tests?" "Dangerous ones," Mason chimed in, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Really dangerous. People could get hurt." Emily nodded seriously. "I see. Physical courage tests, mental challenge tests, or emotional bravery tests." The boys stared at her. Daniel realized he was holding his breath. "What's emotional bravery?" Luke asked in a small voice. Emily knelt down, bringing herself to their eye level. "It's being brave enough to feel sad when sad things happen instead of pretending you're fine. It's being brave enough to love people even when you're scared they might leave. It's being brave enough to trust someone new even when the last people you trusted let you down." The silence stretched out like a held note. Daniel watched his sons' faces cycle through emotions too complex for 5-year-olds to properly process. These were children who'd learned to weaponize their pain to strike first before anyone could hurt them again. But something in Emily's voice, in the way she spoke to them like they were people rather than problems, seemed to reach through their defenses. "The tests aren't really dangerous," Ethan admitted quietly. "We just say that to scare people away." "That makes sense too. If you make people go away before they choose to go away, it doesn't hurt as much." "How did you know that?" Mason demanded, his small face fierce with suspicion. "Because I used to do the same thing." "Why?" Emily was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "Someone I loved very much went away, and it hurt so badly, I thought I might die from it. So I decided to make sure no one could ever hurt me like that again." "Did it work?" Luke's voice was barely a whisper. "For a while. But it also meant I was very lonely, and lonely hurt almost as much as losing someone." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. This woman was telling his sons truths no one else had dared to speak, meeting their pain with honesty instead of platitudes. "What made you stop?" Ethan asked. "I met someone who refused to go away even when I was awful to them. Someone who saw through all my angry, scary behavior to the hurt underneath. Someone who convinced me that taking a chance on loving people was worth the risk of getting hurt." "Was it?" Mason climbed fully out of the fort, now drawn by something in Emily's voice. "Yes. Because the person who taught me that was my daughter, and loving her has been the best thing I've ever done, even though it scared me to death." "You have a little girl?" Luke's eyes went wide. "I do. Her name is Sophie, and she's 7 years old. She's staying with her grandmother today, so I could come meet you." "Does she like forts?" Ethan asked. "She loves them. She builds them out of couch cushions and bed sheets in our living room. They're not as sophisticated as this one, though. This is definitely professional-level fort construction." The boys preened under the praise. Daniel watched transfixed as Emily somehow turned his children's destructive chaos into something positive, without dismissing or minimizing their feelings. "Can we see her?" Mason asked. "Your little girl?" Emily pulled out her phone and showed them a photo. 3 blonde heads clustered around the small screen, studying the image of a dark-haired girl with Emily's green eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "She's pretty," Luke announced. "Does she miss her daddy?" The question hung in the air like a landmine. Daniel saw Emily's composure flicker for just a moment before she answered. She did very much, but her daddy went to heaven when she was very little, so I'm the only parent she remembers. Like our mommy, Ethan said softly. She went to heaven too. I know. I'm very sorry that happened to you. Do you think they're friends now? Luke asked. In heaven, you're Sophie's daddy and our mommy. Emily's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. I think that would be lovely. Maybe they can watch over all of us together, Mason suggested with 5-year-old logic. Maybe they can. Daniel realized he was crying 2 silent tears streaming down his face as he watched his sons connect with this stranger in ways they hadn't connected with anyone since Victoria died. Margaret stood beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Emily. Ethan's voice was tentative now, stripped of its earlier bravado. If you stay, will you help us build better forts? I'd love to help you build forts. What else would you like to do together? Can you read stories? Mommy used to read us stories every night, but nobody reads them the right way anymore. Daniel's throat closed completely. The boys had refused bedtime stories from anyone since Victoria died, screaming and throwing books whenever someone tried. I love reading stories. What makes a story read the right way? Different voices for all the characters, Mason explained seriously. And you have to stop at the scary parts to make sure we're okay. And you have to answer questions, even if they're about stuff that doesn't matter, Luke added. And you have to mean it, Ethan finished. When you read about love and families and happy endings, you have to mean it, not just say it. Emily knelt down again, gathering all 3 boys into her arms. They went willingly, these children, who'd been rejecting physical comfort for months, melting against her, like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. I promise, she whispered. I promise to mean every word. Daniel stepped forward, his voice hoarse when he finally found it. Emily. She looked up at him over his sons' heads, her face radiant with tears and something that looked like hope. When can you start? The smile that transformed her face was like sunrise after the longest night. Right now, if you'll have me. Can she live here? Luke asked, looking between Emily and his father. In the room next to ours? If that's what everyone wants, Daniel managed. It is, all 3 boys shouted in unison. Emily laughed, a sound like silver bells that seemed to chase the shadows from the room's corners. Then I guess I'm home. As the boys dragged her toward their fort, chattering excitedly about story voices and proper fort-building techniques, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in 11 months, the possibility that his family might heal. This woman, this stranger who'd walked into their lives carrying her own grief like a shield, had somehow found the key to his sons' hearts in the space of 30 minutes. Outside, the rain was beginning to slow, and somewhere in the distance, Daniel thought he could hear the first rumble of thunder moving away. The storm was passing, and for the first time since Victoria died, Daniel dared to hope that the sun might actually come out again. Margaret touched his arm gently. She's the one, isn't she, sir? Daniel watched Emily help his sons reconstruct their fort, her laughter mixing with theirs in a harmony he'd thought was lost forever. Yes, he whispered. I think she might be. But even as hope bloomed in his chest, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Emily Carter carried secrets of her own shadows that might prove just as complicated as the ones haunting his family. The way she'd deflected questions about her past, the careful control in her voice when she spoke about loss, there were layers to this woman that he sensed rather than saw. Still watching his sons smile genuine smiles for the first time in almost a year, Daniel decided that some mysteries were worth the risk. Emily Carter had just given him back his children's laughter. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever complications might arise, it would be enough. For now, it would be more than enough. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, as if summoned by the sound of his son's joy, flooding the family room with golden light that seemed to promise better days ahead. And in that moment, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of children at play, and the gentle voice of a woman who understood their pain, Daniel Lawson began to believe in second chances again. The first week passed like a carefully choreographed dance between hope and skepticism. Emily moved into the guest suite adjacent to the boys' rooms with nothing more than 2 suitcases and a determination that seemed to radiate from her very core. Daniel watched from the shadows of his own grief as she seamlessly integrated herself into the rhythms of his household, bringing an energy that had been absent since Victoria's death. But not everyone welcomed the change. "She's too familiar with the children," Clara Whitmore observed on Thursday morning, her sharp voice cutting through the kitchen's usual bustle. The head maid had ruled the domestic staff with iron efficiency for over a decade, her loyalty to the Lawson family absolute, but her acceptance of change practically non-existent. Letting them call her Miss Emily instead of Miss Carter, it's inappropriate. "The boys seem happier," Margaret ventured, carefully arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase. Since Emily's arrival, the penthouse had felt different, lighter somehow, as if someone had opened windows that had been sealed shut for too long. "Happiness fades," Clara replied curtly, her gray hair pulled back in its signature severe bun. "Discipline endures. Mark my words, this honeymoon period won't last. Those boys will test her soon enough, and when they do, she'll crumble like all the rest." From his position at the breakfast bar, Paul Hendricks nodded in grim agreement. The groundskeeper's weathered face bore the skeptical expression of a man who'd seen too many changes in the Lawson household to believe in any of them. "She's got them fooled for now, but children see through pretense eventually. They'll figure out she's just another hired hand, and then we'll be back to square one." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Perhaps we should give her a chance before writing her obituary." "I've given 13 chances," Clara snapped. "This makes 14. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results." What none of them knew was that Emily stood just outside the kitchen door, her hand frozen on the handle as their words washed over her. She'd come downstairs early to prepare the boys' breakfast, something she'd taken upon herself without being asked, but the conversation stopped her cold. The familiar weight of judgment settled on her shoulders like an old coat, bringing with it memories of other kitchens, other whispered conversations about whether she belonged. "Sophie, honey, why don't you go play in the living room while Mommy finishes packing?" The memory surfaced, unbidden, their last morning in Charleston boxes stacked around their tiny apartment, while neighbors whispered about the young widow who couldn't make ends meet. The shame of that day still burned the way people looked at her, like she was something to be pitied or dismissed. "Miss Emily." She turned to find Luke standing at the top of the stairs, his blonde hair tousled from sleep, and his favorite stuffed elephant clutched in his small arms. "Are you okay? You look sad." Emily forced a smile, pushing down the familiar cocktail of self-doubt and defensive anger. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about what to make for breakfast. Can we have pancakes? The kind that look like Mickey Mouse?" "Absolutely." She held out her hand, and Luke skipped down the stairs to take it, his trust so complete it made her chest ache. "Want to help me make them?" "Yes. Can we surprise Daddy and Ethan and Mason?" "That sounds perfect." They entered the kitchen together, Luke chattering excitedly about pancake shapes and syrup designs, while the adult conversation died an abrupt death. Clara's expression tightened further. Paul muttered something under his breath, and Margaret offered an encouraging smile that didn't quite mask her discomfort. "Luke, darling, you shouldn't be bothering Miss Carter so early," Clara said, her tone syrupy sweet, in the way that fooled no one. "I'm sure she has better things to do than entertain children." "She's not bothering me," Emily replied evenly, lifting Luke onto a stool beside the kitchen island. "We're making surprise pancakes. Would you like to help us measure ingredients?" The offer was clearly directed at Luke, but Clara chose to interpret it as a slight. "I think not. There are proper channels for meal preparation in this household, Miss Carter. The kitchen staff handles breakfast according to the children's established dietary requirements." Emily felt the familiar flash of temper that had gotten her in trouble more times than she could count, but Luke's presence kept her voice level. "Of course. I just thought it might be fun for the boys to help make their own breakfast sometimes. Cooking together can be a wonderful learning experience." The children have tutors for learning experiences. They have staff for meal preparation. Your job is to supervise their behavior and ensure they follow household rules. The dismissal in Clara's voice was unmistakable, and Emily felt something inside her bristle. She'd spent her entire adult life fighting for respect, for the right to make decisions about her own child's welfare, for recognition that being young and widowed didn't automatically make her incompetent. She wasn't about to start backing down now. "Luke," she said carefully, "why don't you go wash your hands while I talk with Mrs. Whitmore? But what about the pancakes? We'll make them in just a few minutes. I promise." Luke scampered off toward the powder room, leaving Emily alone with the 3 staff members. She turned to face Clara directly, her posture straight and her voice calm despite the storm building inside her. "Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate your concern for maintaining household standards, but Mr. Lawson hired me to care for his children, and I believe that includes making decisions about their daily activities. If he has concerns about my methods, I'm sure he'll discuss them with me directly." Clara's eyes flashed with something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "Indeed, he will. Mr. Lawson values order and tradition in his home. He won't appreciate having his household routines disrupted by someone who doesn't understand how things work here." "And how exactly do things work here?" Emily's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath now. "Because from what I've observed, the boys have been desperately unhappy for months. If the established routines were working, I wouldn't be standing in this kitchen right now. The children have been through a difficult adjustment period." Paul interjected, his loyalty to Daniel evident in every word. "But Mr. Lawson knows what's best for his sons. He doesn't need some outsider coming in and telling him how to run his family." Emily felt the familiar sting of being labeled an outsider, the same feeling that had followed her through dozens of PTA meetings and school conferences where other mothers whispered about the single mom who worked 2 jobs and couldn't afford the right clothes. But this time, instead of retreating, she stood her ground. "Mr. Lawson hired me because he recognized that his sons needed help. My job isn't to maintain the status quo. It's to help 3 grieving children learn to be happy again. If that disrupts some household routines, I'd say it's a fair trade." "Happiness is temporary," Clara said coldly. "Structure and discipline provide security. These children need boundaries, not indulgence." "They need both," Emily countered. "They need to know they're safe and loved, and they need to know there are rules that keep them secure. But they also need to feel joy again. They need to laugh and play and remember what it feels like to be children, instead of tiny soldiers marching through their grief." Margaret cleared her throat softly. "Perhaps we're all on the same side here. We all want what's best for the boys." "Do we?" Emily's gaze never left Clara's face. "Because it seems to me that some people are more interested in protecting their own territory than in helping 3 little boys heal." The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Clara's face flushed red, and Paul stepped forward as if to physically intervene, but before anyone could respond, the sound of running feet echoed through the kitchen. "Miss Emily! Miss Emily!" Ethan burst through the doorway still in his pajamas and hair sticking up at impossible angles. "Mason put toothpaste in my shoes. I did not." Mason appeared seconds later, his face the picture of injured innocence. "I put toothpaste in Luke's shoes. Ethan's got shampoo kutsu. Boys." Clara's voice cut through their protests like a blade. "Inside voices in the kitchen. And you should not be running through the house in your nightclothes. Go upstairs immediately and get dressed properly." The boys deflated instantly, their excitement evaporating under Clara's disapproval. Emily watched their faces fall and felt something snap inside her chest. "Actually," she said, moving to stand between Clara and the children, "I think this sounds like the perfect morning for a bubble bath war. What do you say, boys? Should we fill up the bathtub and see who can make the biggest bubbles with all that toothpaste and shampoo?" 3 pairs of blue eyes went wide with delight and disbelief. "Really?" Luke whispered, appearing in the doorway with clean hands and renewed hope. "Really? But first we need to clean up whatever mess was made, and then we'll turn it into the best bath game ever." "Miss Carter." Clara's voice was dangerously quiet. "The children have a schedule. Breakfast at 7:30, dressed and groomed by 8:15. Tutoring begins at 9. This kind of chaos disrupts their entire day." Emily turned to face the older woman, and everyone in the kitchen could see the exact moment she stopped trying to please and started fighting for what she believed was right. "Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, these children have lost their mother. They're 5 years old, and they've been living like tiny adults in a museum for almost a year. If giving them permission to play and laugh and be messy disrupts their schedule, then maybe their schedule needs disrupting." "You have no idea what you're talking about." Clara snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You've been here less than a week. I've been caring for this family for 11 years. I was here when these boys were born, when their mother was dying, when Mr. Lawson nearly had a breakdown, trying to hold everything together. You think you can waltz in here with your smiles and your games and fix everything? You're nothing but a temporary employee who doesn't know her place." The words hit Emily like physical blows, each one designed to cut and wound. She felt the familiar rush of shame and anger that came with being dismissed, diminished, treated like she didn't matter. For a moment she was 22 again, standing in a lawyer's office while Victoria's mother explained why a girl like her could never be part of their world. But then she looked at the boys, saw the fear creeping back into their eyes as the adults around them raised their voices and fought over their future, and something fierce and protective rose up inside her. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I don't know my place yet, but I know theirs." She gestured toward the triplets. "Their place is being children. Their place is feeling safe enough to be silly and make mistakes and trust that the adults around them will love them anyway. Their place is not walking on eggshells in their own home, afraid to laugh too loud or play too hard because it might disrupt someone's schedule." She knelt down to the boy's eye level, her voice gentle but clear. "Ethan Mason, Luke, go upstairs and put on clothes you don't mind getting messy. We're going to have the best bubble bath war in the history of bubble bath wars. And then we're going to make Mickey Mouse pancakes and eat them with our fingers if we want to." "Can we really?" Mason's voice was small, uncertain, as if he'd forgotten how to hope for fun. "We really can. I promise." The boys looked between Emily and Clara, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Finally, Ethan stepped forward and took Emily's hand. "Come on, guys," he said to his brothers. Miss Emily promised. They filed out of the kitchen together, leaving Emily alone with three adults, whose expressions ranged from approving to furious. She stood slowly, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Hendricks," she said formally, "I understand your concerns about maintaining order, but those children upstairs are my priority. If you have issues with my methods, I suggest you discuss them with Mr. Lawson. In the meantime, I'd appreciate your cooperation in creating an environment where three little boys can heal from losing their mother." She turned to Margaret, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for the support. If you'd like to help with pancakes later, we'd love to have you." Emily walked out of the kitchen with her head high and her heart pounding, knowing she'd just made enemies, but feeling strangely liberated. She'd spent too many years trying to please people who were determined not to be pleased, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. She wasn't going to do it anymore, especially not when three grieving children needed her to be strong. Upstairs, she found organized chaos as the boys ransacked their closets for appropriately messy clothes. Daniel emerged from his bedroom, drawn by the unusual sounds of laughter echoing through the penthouse. "What's all the excitement about?" he asked, his hair still damp from his morning shower and his expression cautiously hopeful. "Bubble bath war," Luke announced, holding up a pair of swim trunks. "Miss Emily said we can make bubbles with the toothpaste Mason put in my shoes." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Toothpaste in shoes? It was supposed to be a prank," Ethan explained seriously, "but Miss Emily turned it into a game instead." "She's really good at that," Mason added, "making bad things into good things." Daniel looked at Emily over his son's heads, something unreadable in his expression. "Is that so? Sometimes the best adventures start with the biggest messes," Emily replied, helping Luke locate a matching pair of socks. "I hope you don't mind us adjusting the morning schedule a bit." "Mind, I can't remember the last time I heard them this excited about anything." Daniel's voice carried a note of wonder. "Are you planning to join this bubble bath war?" "Someone has to referee," Emily said solemnly. "These competitions can get quite intense." "Can Daddy play too?" Luke asked suddenly, the question that catching everyone off guard. Emily felt the moment crystallize around them. Daniel's sharp intake of breath, the boys' hopeful faces, the weight of a year's worth of careful distance between father and sons. She understood instinctively that this was bigger than bubble baths or breakfast schedules. This was about a family learning to be a family again. "If he wants to," she said carefully. "What do you think, Mr. Lawson? Are you brave enough for a bubble bath war?" Daniel looked at his sons. Really looked at them, and Emily saw the exact moment his careful control cracked just enough to let love back in. "I think I can handle a little bubble bath war," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I should warn you, I'm pretty competitive." The boys erupted in cheers, throwing themselves at their father with an enthusiasm that clearly surprised him. Emily watched him catch them, hold them, and she felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just about the children anymore. This was about a man learning to be a father again, learning to choose joy over grief. "I'll go start the water," she said quietly, giving them space for their reunion. As she headed toward the master bathroom, Emily heard Clara's voice drifting up from the first floor, sharp with displeasure, as she spoke to someone on the phone. The words were indistinct, but the tone was clear. Emily had made an enemy today, and Clara Whitmore wasn't the type to forgive or forget. But looking back at Daniel surrounded by his laughing sons, Emily decided she could live with Clara's disapproval. Some battles were worth fighting, and some prizes were worth any amount of conflict. The sound of this family's laughter was definitely one of them. The bubble bath war that followed would become legend in the Lawson household. Emily had transformed the master bathroom into a sudsy battlefield, complete with strategically placed towels and rules that seemed to change based on whoever was winning. Daniel, initially hesitant and clearly out of practice with such chaos, gradually relaxed under his son's delighted assault. "Daddy, you're supposed to duck when we throw bubbles," Mason instructed, launching a handful of soap suds with military precision. "My mistake," Daniel replied, wiping foam from his hair. "Is there a manual for bubble warfare? Miss Emily makes up the rules as we go," Ethan explained. "That's the best part." Emily perched on the edge of the tub and, serving as both referee and ammunition supplier, felt a warmth spread through her chest as she watched father and sons reconnect through play. This was what she'd hoped for, not just managing the children's behavior, but helping heal the fractures in their family. "Ceasefire," she called as Luke slipped and nearly went underwater. "Emergency towel protocol." The boys giggled as she wrapped Luke in a fluffy towel, checking him over with practiced efficiency. Daniel watched the interaction with something like awe in his expression. "You're good at this," he said quietly, while his sons played with their bath toys. "Really good." "Practice," Emily replied, not mentioning how many nights she'd spent giving Sophie baths in their tiny apartment, turning necessity into play because they couldn't afford much else. Children need permission to be silly sometimes. Victoria used to say the same thing. The words came out without his usual careful control, and Emily saw him brace for the familiar wave of pain. "She sounds like she was wise." She was. Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching Ethan show Luke how to make a beard out of bubbles. "I haven't been able to do this since she died. Play with them, I mean. Everything felt too heavy, too loaded with memories. And now..." Daniel considered this, his gaze moving between his sons and the woman who'd somehow made this moment possible. "Now it feels like maybe making new memories doesn't mean betraying the old ones." Emily felt her breath catch. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that sent an unfamiliar flutter through her stomach. She'd become an expert at keeping emotional distance, at maintaining professional boundaries, even in the most intimate family situations. But sitting here in this bathroom watching Daniel Lawson discover joy in his children again, she felt those carefully constructed walls beginning to shift. "Miss Emily," Luke's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Can we have pancakes now? I'm really hungry." "Absolutely. Let's get everyone dried off and dressed." The next hour passed in a blur of towels and giggles, clean clothes, and tangled hair that needed brushing. Emily moved through the routine with practiced ease, but she was acutely aware of Daniel's presence, the way he helped without getting in her way, the grateful looks he shot her when she handled a minor meltdown with patience instead of frustration. They made their way downstairs together, the boys chattering excitedly about pancake shapes and syrup designs. Emily was so focused on their happiness that she almost missed the subtle signs of trouble brewing below. The kitchen was spotless, too spotless. Clara had clearly been busy during their absence, and the message was unmistakable. This was her domain, and she wouldn't tolerate disruption even from the woman Daniel had hired to help his children. "Good morning, sir." Clara's voice was perfectly professional as she addressed Daniel. "I trust you enjoyed your activity. I've taken the liberty of preparing the children's usual breakfast. Their tutoring schedule has been adjusted to accommodate the delay." Emily felt the rebuke in every carefully chosen word, but before she could respond, Daniel stepped forward. "Actually, Clara, we're planning to make pancakes this morning, all of us together. Sir, the children's dietary requirements can be adjusted for one morning," Daniel finished firmly. "I think some family cooking time sounds perfect." Emily saw surprise flicker across Clara's face, followed quickly by something that looked like calculation. The head maid was clearly reassessing the situation, realizing that Daniel's support for Emily might be stronger than she'd anticipated. "Of course, sir. Shall I assist with the preparation?" "We've got it handled," Emily said pleasantly, moving to gather ingredients from the refrigerator. "But thank you for the offer." The boys immediately set about helping with the pancake preparation, which involved more flour on the counter than in the bowl, and enthusiastic mixing that sent batter flying. Emily guided their efforts with infinite patience, turning every spill into a learning opportunity and every mistake into a reason to laugh. Daniel, initially hesitant about cooking, found himself drawn into the chaos despite his lack of experience. Emily showed him how to flip pancakes without launching them across the kitchen, and the boys cheered every successful attempt like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. "Daddy, yours looks like a dinosaur," Mason announced, peering at Daniel's latest creation. "I was aiming for Mickey Mouse," Daniel admitted, examining his lopsided pancake with rueful amusement. "Dinosaur pancakes are better," Luke assured him seriously. "They're more fierce." Emily watched father and sons bond over breakfast preparation and felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, a sense of belonging. Not just professional satisfaction at a job well done, but the deeper comfort of being part of something bigger than herself. The feeling was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret, who entered the kitchen carrying the morning mail and wearing an expression of barely concealed concern. "Sir, there's something you should see," she said quietly, handing Daniel a thick manila envelope. Emily didn't need to see the return address to know it was bad news. Daniel's entire demeanor changed as he read the contents, his face hardening into the mask of careful control she'd seen him wear during their first meeting. "What is it, Daddy?" Ethan asked, sensing the shift in mood with the uncanny ability children had for reading adult emotions. "Just some business papers," Daniel replied, but his voice had lost its warmth. "Why don't you boys finish your pancakes while I make some phone calls?" He left the kitchen without another word, taking the papers with him. Emily felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settle over the room, like a cloud blocking out the sun. "Is Daddy sad again?" Luke's small voice cut through the silence. Emily knelt beside his chair, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Sometimes adults have to deal with complicated things that make them worry. But that doesn't mean he's not happy about spending time with you this morning." "Will he come back?" Mason asked the question, revealing fears that ran deeper than breakfast schedules and pancake shapes. "He'll come back," Emily promised, hoping she was right. "Your daddy loves you very much. Sometimes he just needs to take care of grown-up problems so he can focus on being with you." But even as she comforted the boys, Emily felt an familiar chill of foreboding. In her experience, manila envelopes and urgent phone calls rarely brought good news. And something about Clara's satisfied expression as she watched Daniel leave suggested that whatever storm was brewing, Emily was going to find herself right in the center of it. The morning that had started with so much promise was beginning to feel like the calm before a hurricane, and Emily had the sinking feeling that all her careful progress with this family was about to be tested in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. The storm Emily had sensed brewing arrived with the force of a Manhattan winter gale, swift and merciless. By afternoon, the carefully constructed peace of their morning had shattered like crystal against stone. Daniel remained locked in his study, his voice a low rumble behind closed doors, as phone call followed, phone call in rapid succession. The boys sensed the change immediately, their earlier joy fading into the familiar wariness that had marked their lives since their mother's death. "Miss Emily," Ethan whispered during what should have been their afternoon story time, "is Daddy going to send you away like the others?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Emily set down the book they'd been reading and gathered all three boys onto the couch beside her. their small bodies warm and trusting against her sides. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see storm clouds gathering over the city, matching the atmosphere inside the penthouse. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" "Because he gets those papers and makes those phone calls, and then people go away," Mason explained with the matter-of-fact tone children used when describing the incomprehensible cruelties of adult life. Mrs. Henderson got papers like that, and then she cried and never came back. Emily's heart clenched. Mrs. Henderson had been nanny number 7, a kind woman in her 50s, who'd lasted 3 weeks before some unnamed crisis sent her packing. The boys had grown attached to her, which made her sudden departure even more devastating. "Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with you boys," Emily said carefully. "But I promise you, whatever is happening right now, it's not because of anything you did wrong." "But will you leave?" Luke's voice was barely audible, his face buried against her shoulder. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 little hearts hanging on her answer. She couldn't promise them forever, she'd learned that lesson the hard way. But she could promise them her best effort, her fierce protection, her refusal to abandon them without a fight. "I'm not planning to go anywhere," she said firmly. "Whatever problems your daddy is dealing with, we'll figure them out together. That's what families do." "Are we a family?" Ethan asked, hope warring with fear in his young voice. "We're becoming one," Emily whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "And I don't give up on family easily." The boys seemed to accept this, settling back against her as she resumed reading. But Emily's mind was racing, trying to piece together the clues scattered throughout the day. Clara's satisfied expression, the manila envelope, Daniel's sudden withdrawal. It all pointed to some kind of deliberate sabotage, though she couldn't imagine what form it might take. Her answer came 2 hours later, delivered by Margaret with trembling hands and tears in her eyes. "Miss Carter." The housekeeper's voice shook as she found Emily helping the boys with a puzzle in the family room. "Mr. Lawson would like to see you in his study, immediately." The boys looked up from their puzzle pieces, anxiety radiating from their small forms like heat from a flame. Emily forced her voice to remain calm, even as her stomach twisted into knots. "Of course. Boys, why don't you work on finishing this puzzle while I talk with your daddy? I'll be right back." "Promise." Luke's eyes were wide with the kind of fear that came from too many broken promises. "I promise." Emily followed Margaret through the penthouse's maze of hallways, her footsteps muffled by Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars. The familiar opulence that had once intimidated her now felt like armor. She belonged here, had earned her place through weeks of patient care and growing love. Whatever was waiting in Daniel's study, she would face it with the strength that had carried her through her husband's death, single motherhood, and every challenge life had thrown at her since. Daniel stood with his back to the door when she entered, his silhouette, dark against the gray sky, visible through the window. On his desk lay scattered papers, a laptop computer displaying what looked like legal documents, and a cell phone that had clearly seen heavy use. The air in the room felt charged, like the moments before lightning strikes. "Close the door, please," he said, without turning around. Emily did as he asked, then stood quietly waiting. She'd learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than words, especially when dealing with angry men who expected her to cower or plead. "Tell me about Charleston," Daniel said finally, his voice carefully controlled. The words hit Emily like ice water. Charleston, the city she'd fled 3 years ago, the place where her carefully constructed life had collapsed in scandal and whispered accusations. The place where she'd learned that being young and pretty and vulnerable made her an easy target when powerful people needed someone to blame. "What specifically would you like to know?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. Daniel turned then, and Emily saw the conflict warring in his expression, anger and disappointment, but also something that looked like hope that she could explain away whatever he'd learned. "I'd like to know why you failed to mention that you were fired from your last position for inappropriate conduct with your employer." The accusation hung between them like a poisonous cloud. Emily felt the familiar burn of shame and rage that always accompanied this particular lie, the story that had followed her, despite her best efforts to outrun it. She thought of the boys upstairs, their faces bright with trust, and felt something fierce and protective rise up inside her. "I wasn't fired," she said clearly. "I resigned. The report I received suggests otherwise." Daniel moved to his desk, shuffling through papers with barely controlled fury. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries. Married man, 3 children. According to his wife's private investigator, you were having an affair with him while employed as their children's nanny. That's a lie. Mrs. Blackwood has photographs, Emily. Hotel receipts. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between you and her husband. Emily closed her eyes, remembering those dark days when her world had imploded with surgical precision. Richard Blackwood, charming and powerful, and utterly ruthless when cornered. His wife, Patricia, bitter and vindictive and willing to destroy anyone she perceived as a threat. And Emily caught in the middle with nothing but her word against their money and influence. "The photographs were fabricated," she said quietly. "The hotel receipts were for meetings I attended as Mr. Blackwood's assistant, duties that extended beyond childcare because Mrs. Blackwood was frequently absent. The phone calls were about work schedules, the children's needs, and family logistics. According to the report, you left Charleston in the middle of the night with no forwarding address. That doesn't sound like the behavior of an innocent woman." Emily felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "It sounds like the behavior of a woman who'd been threatened by a powerful family with the resources to destroy her reputation and her ability to support her child." "What kind of threats?" The question was quiet, but Emily heard the shift in Daniel's tone from accusation to something that might have been genuine curiosity. She opened her eyes and found him watching her with an intensity that seemed to see straight through her defenses. The kind that made it clear I could leave quietly or face charges for theft, fraud, and anything else they could manufacture. The kind that made it clear my daughter's safety wasn't guaranteed if I stayed and fought. Daniel was silent for a long moment, studying her face with the same analytical focus she'd seen him apply to business decisions. "Why didn't you fight back if you were innocent, Mr. Lawson?" Emily interrupted, her voice sharp with years of suppressed anger. "How much money do you think a 25-year-old widow with a 4-year-old daughter has to spend on lawyers? How many character witnesses do you think I could afford against a family that owns half of Charleston's legal community? So you ran. I protected my daughter. I protected myself. I chose survival over principle because principle doesn't pay rent, or buy groceries, or keep social services from asking questions about why a single mother can't hold down a job." The raw honesty in her voice seemed to shake something loose in Daniel's carefully controlled facade. He moved around the desk closer to her, and Emily saw the exact moment his anger began to shift into something more complex. "The investigator who provided this report," he said slowly. "He was very thorough, very expensive. The kind of professional someone hires when they want to destroy a person's credibility completely." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October storm outside. "Someone hired an investigator to look into my background. Someone who knew exactly where to look and what questions to ask. Someone who had access to sealed records and private family business." Daniel's voice was grim. Someone who wanted to make sure I received this information today, right after we'd had such a successful morning together. The implication hit Emily like a sledgehammer. You think someone in your household? I think someone who felt threatened by your success with my sons decided to take preemptive action. Daniel's jaw tightened. The question is whether any of this matters to you personally, or if you're planning to use it as an excuse to leave. Emily stared at him, struggling to process the shift in their conversation. You're not firing me. Should I be? I don't know, you tell me. Do you believe I'm the kind of woman who would seduce a married man while caring for his children? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. I believe you're the kind of woman who turned my son's chaos into joy this morning. I believe you're the kind of woman who stands up to bullies even when you're outnumbered. I believe you're the kind of woman who would do anything to protect the children in her care. Emily felt tears spring to her eyes, the relief so overwhelming it made her knees weak. Then why are we having this conversation? Because I needed to know the truth. Because my sons have been hurt enough, and I won't let anyone else come into their lives with hidden agendas or ulterior motives. Daniel stepped closer, and Emily could see the vulnerability beneath his powerful exterior. And because I needed to know if you trust me enough to tell me the truth when it matters. The truth is that Richard Blackwood was having an affair, Emily said quietly. Not with me, but with his business partner's wife. When his own wife found out, she needed someone to blame who couldn't fight back. I was convenient. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I've learned that the truth doesn't matter as much as people want to believe it does. Because I was afraid that if you knew about Charleston, you'd decide I was too much trouble. Because I've been running from that story for 3 years, and I'm tired of letting it define me. Daniel reached out, then his fingers gentle as they brushed away a tear Emily didn't realize had fallen. You don't have to run anymore. Not from this and not from us. The touch of his hand against her cheek sent electricity through Emily's entire body. She found herself leaning into the contact, craving the comfort and connection she'd denied herself for so long. This was dangerous territory, feelings that went far beyond professional boundaries, attraction that threatened to complicate everything she'd worked to build with his children. Mr. Lawson. Daniel, he corrected softly. I think we're past formalities, don't you? Emily looked up into his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just gratitude or relief, but something deeper and more complex. Something that looked like the beginning of feelings that could change everything between them. Daniel, she whispered, testing his name on her lips. This is complicated. Everything worthwhile is complicated. His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and Emily felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. The question is whether it's worth exploring. Before Emily could answer, the study door burst open without warning. Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway, her face flushed with righteous indignation and her eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like triumph. Sir, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but there's been an incident with the children. Clara's words died abruptly as she took in the scene before her. Daniel and Emily, standing close together, his hand on her face, the intimate atmosphere that spoke of shared secrets and growing attraction. Emily stepped back quickly, professional distance reasserting itself even as her heart continued to race. Daniel's expression hardened into the mask of cold control she remembered from their first meeting. What kind of incident? He asked, his voice sharp with concern and barely concealed irritation at the interruption. Clara's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Ethan pushed Luke down the stairs, sir. The boy is crying and asking for you. I thought you should know immediately given the circumstances. Emily was moving before Clara finished speaking, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. Is he hurt? Did you call a doctor? I hardly think that's your concern anymore, Clara replied with barely concealed hostility. Given what I just witnessed, I think it's clear that your priorities lie elsewhere. The insinuation hit its target with surgical precision. Emily felt the familiar shame burn through her, the automatic assumption that any physical proximity between her and a male employer must be inappropriate. It was Charleston all over again, whispered accusations, knowing looks, the gradual erosion of trust that would eventually force her to choose between her job and her dignity. That's enough. Daniel's voice cut through Clara's implications like a blade. Emily, go check on Luke. I'll deal with this. Emily hesitated for a moment, torn between her concern for the children and her awareness that leaving Daniel alone with Clara might give the head maid exactly the opportunity she was looking for. But Luke's potential injury trumped everything else, and she hurried from the study with Clara's satisfied smile burning into her back. She found Luke in the family room, tears streaming down his face as he clutched his right arm against his chest. Ethan and Mason hovered nearby, their faces pale with guilt and fear. Luke, sweetheart, let me see, Emily murmured, kneeling beside the youngest triplet and carefully examining his arm. Can you move your fingers for me? Luke complied, wincing, but managing to wiggle all 5 digits. Emily felt along his arm with gentle fingers, checking for obvious breaks or swelling. Her nursing training rudimentary as it was suggested, bruising rather than fracture, but she wasn't taking any chances. What happened? She asked Ethan, whose face crumpled at her gentle tone. We were playing pirates, he whispered. Luke was trying to climb the banister like it was a ship's mast, and I tried to stop him, but I pushed too hard and he fell. It was an accident, Mason added quickly. Ethan didn't mean to hurt him. Emily looked at the 2 older boys and saw the terror in their eyes, not fear of punishment, but fear of being labeled as violent, dangerous, unlovable. She recognized the look from her own childhood, the particular anxiety that came from adults who were quick to judge and slow to understand. Of course it was an accident, she said firmly. Sometimes when we're playing and having fun, accidents happen. That's why we have rules about climbing on furniture, not to stop you from having fun, but to keep everyone safe. Are you going to tell Daddy we were bad? Luke asked through his tears. I'm going to tell your daddy that you were playing and someone got hurt, and that we need to make sure you're okay. There's a big difference between being bad and having an accident. Emily heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see Daniel approaching, his expression tight with worry. Behind him, Clara followed like a shadow, her face carefully arranged in an expression of concern that didn't quite mask her anticipation. How is he? Daniel asked, dropping to his knees beside Emily and reaching for his youngest son. I think it's just bruising, but we should have a doctor take a look to be sure, Emily replied. Luke, can you tell Daddy what happened? As Luke recounted the pirate game and subsequent fall, Emily watched Daniel's face cycle through relief, concern, and something that looked like self-recrimination. She could practically see him adding this incident to his growing list of parental failures. Sir, Clara interjected smoothly, perhaps this is a good time to discuss appropriate supervision protocols. If the children were properly monitored, the children were supervised, Emily said quietly but firmly. I was in the study at your employer's request. Accidents happen even with the best supervision, Mrs. Whitmore. Indeed they do. Clara agreed, her tone suggesting that some people's supervision was clearly better than others. Perhaps if there were fewer distractions, such incidents could be avoided. The implication was crystal clear. and Emily felt the familiar rage begin to build in her chest. Clara was using Luke's accident as ammunition, turning a moment of childhood mishap into evidence of Emily's alleged unprofessionalism. It was a masterful manipulation, and Emily could see from Daniel's expression that it was having its intended effect. "Boys," Daniel said carefully, "why don't you go wash up for dinner while Miss Emily and I talk with Mrs. Whitmore?" "But Daddy," Ethan protested, "we want to make sure Luke is okay." "Luke will be fine. We're going to have Dr. Martinez come take a look at his arm just to be safe. But right now I need you boys to give us some grown-up time." The children reluctantly filed out of the room, but Emily could see them lingering in the hallway, their young faces creased with worry that went far beyond Luke's potential injury. They sensed the shift in atmosphere, the return of the tension that had marked their lives before Emily's arrival. When they were alone, Clara turned to Daniel with an expression of sorrowful duty. "Sir, I feel it's my responsibility to share some concerns that have been growing among the household staff." Emily's stomach dropped. She'd known this moment was coming from the instant Clara walked in on her and Daniel, but she'd hoped for more time to prepare, more time to strengthen the foundation of trust they'd been building. "What concerns?" Daniel's voice was carefully neutral, but Emily could see the walls going back up, the protective distance reasserting itself. "There's been talk about the nature of Miss Carter's relationship with you, sir. The staff has noticed certain intimacies that go beyond professional boundaries." "Such as?" Clara's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Private conversations behind closed doors, shared meals with the family rather than eating with the staff, and now, of course, the scene I inadvertently witnessed in your study." Emily felt the familiar cocktail of shame and rage flood her system. Every kindness Daniel had shown her, every moment of inclusion in family life was being twisted into evidence of impropriety. It was Charleston all over again, the same playbook used by powerful people to destroy those who threatened their control. "Mrs. Whitmore," Emily said carefully, "I think you're misinterpreting. Am I?" Clara turned to face her, directly dropping all pretense of concern. "You've been here less than 2 weeks, Miss Carter, and already you've positioned yourself as far more than a nanny, cooking with the family, joining their private activities, and now carrying on romantic entanglements with your employer, while the children are in your care. That's enough." Daniel's voice was sharp, but Emily could see the doubt creeping into his expression. The same doubt that had allowed the Blackwood family to destroy her reputation in Charleston. "Sir, I only want what's best for the children," Clara continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "They've been through so much trauma already. The last thing they need is another unstable adult relationship in their lives." The words hit Emily like physical blows, each one designed to exploit Daniel's deepest fears about his children's well-being. Clara was a master manipulator, using just enough truth to make her lies believable. "You're right," Emily said quietly, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. "The children's stability is the most important thing." Daniel looked at her sharply, clearly surprised by her response. Emily met his gaze directly, letting him see the pain in her eyes, even as she made the sacrifice she knew was necessary. "Perhaps it would be best if I maintained more professional distance going forward," she continued. "No more family meals or shared activities beyond my direct duties. Clear boundaries that can't be misinterpreted." "Emily," Daniel started, but she cut him off. "It's for the best," she said firmly. "Mrs. Whitmore is right that the children need stability above all else. I won't be responsible for creating more chaos in their lives." Clara's smile was small but triumphant. She'd won this round, forced Emily back into her designated place, restored the household hierarchy that Emily's growing influence had threatened. But as Emily walked past Daniel toward the door, she felt his hand catch her arm. When she looked back, she saw something in his expression that gave her hope, not acceptance of Clara's victory, but determination to fight for what he was beginning to realize he wanted. "This conversation isn't over," he said quietly, his words meant for her alone. Emily nodded, understanding that he was giving her time and space to think, to plan, to prepare for whatever came next. Clara might have won this battle, but the war for this family's future was far from over. As she headed upstairs to check on the boys, Emily heard Daniel's voice behind her, cold and authoritative, as he addressed his headmaid. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think it's time we discussed your future employment with this family." Clara's gasp of shock followed Emily up the stairs, and despite everything, she felt a small smile tug at her lips. Daniel Lawson might be wealthy and powerful, but he was also a father who'd just remembered what fighting for his children looked like. And Emily Carter had never backed down from a fight worth winning. The sound of Clara's shocked gasp still echoed in Emily's ears as she climbed the marble staircase, each step feeling like a small victory despite the chaos swirling around her. Behind the closed doors of Daniel's study, she could hear voices rising in what was clearly becoming a heated confrontation. Part of her wanted to stay and listen to witness Clara's downfall firsthand, but the boys needed her more than her curiosity needed satisfaction. She found them huddled together in Luke's bedroom, their earlier excitement completely evaporated. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, with his arms wrapped around his youngest brother, while Mason paced by the window with nervous energy that reminded Emily painfully of his father. They looked up when she entered, 3 pairs of blue eyes filled with anxiety that no 5-year-old should have to carry. "Is Daddy mad at us?" Luke asked in a small voice, his arm still cradled protectively against his chest. Emily sat down on the bed beside them, gathering all 3 boys into her arms, despite the professional distance she'd just promised to maintain. Some moments transcended boundaries, and this was definitely one of them. "Your daddy isn't mad at anyone," she said firmly. "He's worried about Luke's arm, and he's having a grown-up conversation with Mrs. Whitmore about some household things. None of it has anything to do with you boys being in trouble." "But Mrs. Whitmore looked angry," Mason observed with the sharp perception children often displayed about adult emotions. "She had that face she gets when she's telling people what they did wrong." Emily felt a surge of protective anger toward Clara, whose manipulative games were now frightening children who'd already endured far too much adult drama. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things just like children do. It doesn't mean anyone is bad or wrong, it just means we have different ideas about how things should work. Different ideas about what... Ethan pressed his role as the protective older brother, evident in every line of his small body. Emily chose her words carefully, knowing that anything she said would be repeated and analyzed by 3 intelligent children who'd learned to read between the lines of adult conversations. About the best way to take care of you boys. Everyone wants you to be happy and safe, but we don't all agree on exactly how to make that happen. "We're happy with you," Luke said simply, snuggling closer against her side. "Why can't everyone else just be happy too?" The innocent question hit Emily like a physical blow. She thought about Clara's accusations, about the investigation into her past, about the careful web of lies and half-truths that seemed to follow her wherever she went. These children deserved better than the complications she brought into their lives, but they also deserved someone who would fight for their happiness. "Sometimes people are afraid of change," she said softly, "even when change might be good for everyone." Before any of the boys could respond, a soft knock interrupted their conversation. Dr. Martinez stood in the doorway, his kind face creased with professional concern and his medical bag clutched in one weathered hand. "I heard we have a young pirate who had an unfortunate encounter with gravity," he said, with the gentle humor that had made him the boys' favorite doctor since their birth. Luke perked up slightly at being called a pirate, though he still clung to Emily's hand as Dr. Martinez approached. The elderly physician had been the Lawson family doctor for over 20 years, delivering the triplets and seeing them through every childhood illness and injury. His presence brought a sense of stability that Emily found deeply comforting. "Let's take a look at that arm, Captain Luke," Dr. Martinez said, settling onto the bed with practiced ease. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" As Luke recounted the pirate adventure with increasing enthusiasm, Emily watched the doctor's gentle hands examine the injured arm. She could see from his expression that the injury wasn't serious, but he conducted a thorough examination anyway, asking questions and making observations that seemed designed as much to reassure the family as to assess the damage. "Well, Captain, Dr. Son," Martinez announced after several minutes, "you've got a beautiful bruise forming and some sore muscles, but everything is exactly where it should be. No breaks, no serious damage. You'll be back to climbing rigging in no time." The relief in the room was palpable. Ethan's shoulders sagged as guilt transformed into gratitude, and Mason stopped his nervous pacing to throw himself onto the bed beside his brothers. "But I do have some pirate medicine that might help with the soreness." Dr. Martinez continued, pulling a small tube of cream from his bag. "This is special medicine that only works on brave pirates who listen to their doctor's orders." "What kind of orders?" Luke asked suspiciously, though Emily could see he was intrigued by the idea of pirate-specific medicine. "No more climbing banisters without proper safety equipment. Pirates always use ropes and harnesses when they're working at height." Dr. Martinez's tone was serious but kind. "And if you're going to have sword fights, use foam swords instead of anything that might cause real damage." "We don't have foam swords," Mason pointed out practically. "Then perhaps that's something we can remedy," Emily said before she could stop herself. The words were out before she remembered her promise to maintain professional distance, but seeing the boys' faces light up made her decision easy. Some things were more important than Clara's disapproval. Dr. Martinez smiled at the exchange, then turned to Emily with a more serious expression. "Might I have a word with you privately, Miss Carter?" Emily felt her stomach clench. Had Clara already reached the doctor with her accusations? Was this another attempt to undermine her position with the family? "Boys, can you give Dr. Martinez and me a few minutes to talk about grown-up medical things?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. The triplets reluctantly agreed, settling into Luke's reading corner with a stack of picture books. Emily followed Dr. Martinez into the hallway, her heart pounding with anxiety about what new crisis might be unfolding. "Miss Carter," the doctor began quietly, "I wanted to thank you." Emily blinked in surprise. "Thank me for what?" "For giving me back my patients," Dr. Martinez said with genuine warmth. "I've been treating these boys since they were born, and I've watched them struggle with their grief for the past year. Today is the first time in 11 months that I've seen them acting like normal, healthy children instead of tiny trauma victims." The unexpected praise hit Emily like a wave of relief. They're remarkable children. They just needed someone to see past their pain to the joy underneath. Indeed, they did. And more importantly, their father needed someone to help him remember how to be their father instead of just their guardian. "Dr. Khan." Martinez's expression grew more serious. "Daniel is a good man, but grief can blind us to what's right in front of us. You've helped him see his children again." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "I hope so. They deserve to have their father back." "They deserve to have you both," Dr. Martinez said meaningfully. Which is why I wanted to warn you about certain obstacles you might face. Emily's stomach dropped. What kind of obstacles? The kind that come from people who benefit from maintaining the status quo. People who might feel threatened by positive changes in this household. The doctor's voice was carefully neutral, but his meaning was clear. I've been Daniel's family doctor for 2 decades. I've seen how this household operates, and I've watched several good people be driven away by those who prefer chaos to change. Clara, Emily said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore has been with the family for many years, and she's become quite protective of her position. Sometimes that protection extends to discouraging competition. Emily thought about the investigation into her past, about Clara's satisfied expression when she'd burst into Daniel's study, about the careful timing of every crisis that had unfolded today. Do you think she was behind the background check? Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think Mrs. Whitmore is a woman who believes the ends justify the means, and I think she sees you as a threat to everything she's worked to build here. Because I'm changing the boys' routines. Because you're changing their father, Dr. Martinez said gently. Daniel hasn't smiled genuinely in almost a year. He hasn't played with his children or shown interest in family life beyond basic necessities. You've given him back his capacity for joy, and that threatens the carefully controlled environment Mrs. Whitmore has created. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October evening. What are you saying? I'm saying that you should be very careful about who you trust and what information you share. And I'm saying that if you truly care about this family, you shouldn't let anyone drive you away without a fight. Before Emily could respond, the sound of a door slamming echoed through the penthouse. Heavy footsteps marched across the marble floors below, moving with the decisive rhythm of someone leaving in anger. Dr. Martinez and Emily exchanged glances, both understanding immediately what they were hearing. It sounds like Mrs. Whitmore is no longer a concern, Dr. Martinez observed mildly. Or she's about to become a much bigger one, Emily murmured, thinking about the vindictive fury she'd seen in Clara's eyes. They were interrupted by Daniel's voice calling from downstairs. Emily, could I speak with you for a moment? Dr. Martinez squeezed Emily's shoulder gently. Remember what I said about fighting for what matters. Some battles are worth the risk. Emily nodded, steeling herself for whatever conversation awaited her downstairs. She checked on the boys one more time, making sure they were safely occupied with their books, then made her way back to Daniel's study. She found him standing by the window again, but this time his posture was different, less defeated, more determined. The papers that had caused such chaos earlier were gone and the laptop was closed. When he turned to face her, Emily saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Clara's gone, he said without preamble. Permanently. Emily felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What happened? I found out who hired the investigator to look into your background. Daniel's voice was calm, but Emily could see the controlled anger burning in his eyes. Mrs. Whitmore has been quite busy protecting what she considers her territory. She was trying to get me fired. She was trying to destroy you, Daniel corrected grimly. The investigator she hired wasn't just looking for professional misconduct. He was looking for anything that could be used to humiliate you, frighten you, or drive you away. Financial problems, family secrets, legal vulnerabilities, anything that could be weaponized against you. Emily sank into the chair across from his desk, feeling suddenly exhausted. Why, what did I ever do to her? You made me happy, Daniel said simply. You made my children happy. You reminded us what it felt like to be a family, instead of a collection of traumatized individuals sharing the same address. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond professional relationships or household management. Emily looked up into Daniel's eyes and saw something there that made her heart race, not just gratitude or relief, but something deeper and more dangerous. "Daniel," she said carefully, "we need to talk about boundaries, about what's appropriate and what isn't. Do we?" He moved around the desk closer to her, and Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Because it seems to me that the only people concerned about inappropriate boundaries were the ones trying to use them as weapons against you. The boys need stability. The boys need love." Daniel interrupted, his voice intense. "They need joy and laughter, and the security that comes from knowing the adults in their lives care about each other. They need to see that families can heal, that people can choose happiness even after devastating loss." Emily stood up abruptly, putting distance between them, even as every instinct screamed at her to move closer. "You're their father. I'm their employee. There are lines we shouldn't cross." "Why?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been dancing around since her first day in his house. "Give me one good reason why two people who care about each other and want the same things for these children shouldn't explore the possibility of building something together." Emily closed her eyes, trying to summon all the logical arguments about power dynamics and professional ethics, about the dangers of mixing business with pleasure. But all she could think about was the way the boys had looked that morning, when all four adults in their lives had been happy and working together. She thought about the laughter echoing through the penthouse, about the feeling of belonging she'd experienced during their chaotic pancake breakfast. "Charleston," she said finally. "What happened in Charleston happens because people assume the worst about women in my position. Single mothers working for wealthy men are always suspect, always seen as potential threats to family stability. Charleston happened because you were vulnerable and alone, facing people with more power and fewer scruples," Daniel said firmly. "It won't happen here because you're not alone anymore, because I know who you are and what you mean to this family." "Do you?" Emily opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. "Because Clara managed to plant seeds of doubt in your mind, with nothing more than a private investigator's report and some carefully timed accusations. How do I know the next crisis won't be the one that breaks your faith in me?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Emily could see him processing the validity of her concerns. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because I've seen you with my children when you thought no one was watching. I've seen the way you comfort them when they're scared, the way you celebrate their small victories, the way you protect them even when it puts you at risk." He stepped closer, and Emily found herself unable to move away. "I've seen you choose their well-being over your own comfort every single day since you walked into our lives. That's my job." "No," Daniel said firmly. "Your job is to supervise their behavior and ensure they follow basic safety rules. Everything else, the love, the creativity, the genuine care you show them, that's who you are. That's the woman I'm falling in love with." The words hit Emily like lightning, illuminating everything she'd been trying to keep hidden from herself. The attraction she'd been fighting, the growing sense of belonging, the way her heart raced every time he looked at her, it all crystallized into something too powerful to deny. "Daniel." She whispered his name, a prayer and a warning all at once. "I know it's complicated," he said softly, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "I know there are risks and obstacles and 1,000 reasons why this might be a terrible idea, but I also know that I haven't felt alive in over a year, and you've given me back everything I thought I'd lost forever." Emily felt herself leaning into his touch, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of hope and longing. The boys love you. They trust you. They light up when you walk into a room, and they've started talking about the future again instead of just surviving each day. Daniel's thumbs traced across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. They need you, Emily. I need you. I'm scared. She admitted the words barely audible. So am I, Daniel confessed. Terrified, actually. Because caring about you means risking the kind of loss that nearly destroyed me before. But I'd rather live with that fear than go back to the empty existence we had before you came. Emily closed the remaining distance between them, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat under her palms, strong and steady and real. This was insane, reckless, and dangerous, and potentially devastating for everyone involved. But looking into his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to care about the consequences. If we do this, she said quietly, if we try to build something together, there can't be any secrets between us. No hidden agendas, no protecting each other from difficult truths. Agreed, Daniel said immediately. Complete honesty even when it's uncomfortable. And the boys come first. Always. If this relationship ever becomes something that hurts them or makes them feel insecure, we stop, no matter how much it hurts us. Agreed. Daniel repeated, his voice rough with emotion. Anything else? Emily thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the obstacles they'd face from the outside world, all the reasons why a billionaire CEO and a young widow with secrets in her past made an unlikely match. Then she thought about the boys upstairs, about the family they were all learning to become, about the possibility of love after loss. Kiss me, she whispered. Daniel didn't need to be asked twice. His lips found hers with a gentleness that spoke of reverence and restraint, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Emily melted into the kiss, pouring all her hopes and fears and carefully guarded feelings into the connection between them. It was everything she'd dreamed of, and nothing like she'd expected. Tender, where she'd anticipated passion, healing, where she'd feared destruction. When they finally broke apart, Emily felt like she was breathing for the first time in years. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face like she was something precious. I love you, he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I know it's too soon and too complicated, but I love you, Emily Carter. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you've brought light back into our lives. Emily felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than fear. I love you too, she whispered back. God help me, I love you too. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other and marveling at the magnitude of what they'd just admitted. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. But inside Daniel's study, Emily felt safer and more at peace than she had in years. The spell was broken by the sound of running footsteps in the hallway, followed by urgent knocking on the study door. Daddy, Miss Emily. Ethan's voice carried clearly through the wood. Come quick, Luke is crying again, and Mason thinks he sees bad guys outside. Emily and Daniel sprang apart, professional instincts reasserting themselves immediately. Whatever was happening between them personally would have to wait. The children needed them. They found chaos in the family room, where Luke was indeed crying while clutching his injured arm. Mason stood pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, his face white with fear, as he stared out at the storm-darkened street below. What's wrong, sweetheart? Emily asked, dropping to her knees beside Luke and checking his arm for signs of increased swelling or injury. It hurts more now, Luke sobbed. And Mason said he saw Mrs. Whitmore talking to scary men by the cars. Emily's blood ran cold. She looked up at Daniel, seeing her own concern reflected in his expression. They both moved to the window where Mason still stood, peering down at the street 43 floors below. "Where did you see them, buddy?" Daniel asked, lifting Mason so he could see better. "There." Mason pointed to a cluster of black cars parked across the street. "Mrs. Whitmore was talking to some men in dark clothes, and they kept looking up at our building." Daniel and Emily exchanged glances. With the storm and the distance, it was impossible to make out details, but the presence of multiple vehicles and unknown individuals loitering near the building was definitely cause for concern. "Could be paparazzi," Daniel murmured, thinking aloud. "The investigator Clara hired might have sold information about our family situation to tabloid reporters." Emily felt a familiar chill of dread. She'd dealt with aggressive reporters before, during the worst days of the Charleston scandal. They had a way of turning private family matters into public entertainment, and they were particularly vicious when the story involved wealthy men and the women they hired to care for their children. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Daniel was already reaching for his phone. "I call my security team and make sure this building is locked down tight. Then I call my lawyer and find out what legal recourse we have against Clara for breach of confidentiality." As Daniel made his calls, Emily focused on comforting the boys. Luke's arm was indeed more painful, likely due to increased activity and the natural progression of the bruising, but it wasn't seriously injured. Mason's fears about the men outside were harder to address, especially since they might be entirely justified. "Are we in trouble?" Ethan asked quietly, his role as protector making him hypersensitive to adult anxiety. "No, sweetheart," Emily assured him. "Sometimes when people are upset about losing their jobs, they make poor choices about how to handle their anger. But your daddy is taking care of everything, and you boys are completely safe." "Will the bad men try to come upstairs?" Luke asked, his tears subsiding as Emily's calm presence reassured him. "No one can come upstairs without special permission," Emily said firmly. "This building has the best security in the city. You're safer here than anywhere else in the world." Daniel finished his calls and returned to where his family was huddled together on the couch. Emily noticed that he didn't hesitate to include her in that designation, his family, and felt a warm glow despite the crisis unfolding around them. "Security is handling the situation downstairs," he reported. "They're going to remove anyone who doesn't have legitimate business in the area, and our lawyer is looking into filing restraining orders against Clara and anyone she might have shared confidential information with." "What about dinner?" Mason asked with the practical concerns of a 5-year-old. "Are we still going to eat?" Emily laughed, despite everything charmed by the resilience of children in the face of adult drama. "Absolutely. In fact, I think tonight calls for something special. How do you boys feel about building a blanket fort in the family room and having an indoor picnic?" The boys' faces lit up with excitement. The threat of photographers and vindictive former employees temporarily forgotten in the face of blanket fort possibilities. Emily felt Daniel's hand brush against hers as they worked together to transform the elegant family room into a cozy cave of pillows and throws. As they settled into their improvised fort with sandwiches and hot chocolate, Emily realized that this was what family actually looked like. Not perfect moments in perfect settings, but people choosing to take care of each other through whatever storms life brought their way. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and unknown threats lurked in the darkness. But inside their blanket fort, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and the warmth of newfound love, Emily felt like she was finally, truly home. The war with Clara Whitmore might just be beginning, and the challenges ahead were likely to test everything they'd built together. But for tonight, wrapped in Daniel's arms while his children slept peacefully beside them, Emily allowed herself to believe that love really could conquer all the obstacles in their path. Some battles were worth fighting, and this family was worth every risk she'd ever have to take. The peace Emily had found in their makeshift blanket fort proved as fragile as morning mist. She woke 3 hours later to the sharp buzz of Daniel's security phone, its urgent tone cutting through the quiet of their family room sanctuary. The boys stirred restlessly around her, their sleep disturbed by the electronic intrusion, while Daniel carefully extricated himself from their nest of pillows and blankets. "Lawson," he answered in a low voice, moving toward the window. Emily watched his expression shift from drowsy contentment to sharp alertness as he listened to whoever was on the other end. His jaw tightened, and she saw his free hand clench into a fist at his side. Whatever news the security team was delivering, it wasn't good. "How many?" Daniel asked quietly, then paused. "And they have credentials, legal credentials." Emily felt her stomach drop. She'd hoped the photographers Mason had spotted were just opportunistic paparazzi looking for a quick story about a billionaire's domestic drama. But something in Daniel's tone suggested the situation had escalated far beyond simple tabloid harassment. Luke stirred against her side, his injured arm still tender enough to wake him when he shifted position. His blue eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face with the trusting gaze that never failed to make her chest tight with protective love. "Miss Emily," he whispered, "is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," she murmured, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Daddy's just talking to the security people about boring grown-up things." But even as she offered comfort, Emily's attention remained focused on Daniel's conversation. She caught fragments: court order, child welfare, immediate access, that sent chills racing down her spine. This wasn't about photographers or tabloid stories. This was something much more serious. Daniel ended the call and turned back toward their little fort, his face carefully controlled, but his eyes revealing the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. Emily recognized that expression from their first meeting, the look of a man preparing for battle while trying to protect those he loved from the reality of what they were facing. "Daniel," she said softly, careful not to wake the other two boys. "What's happening?" He knelt beside their nest of blankets, his voice barely above a whisper. "Child Protective Services is downstairs. They have a court order for an emergency welfare check." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. CPS involvement was every parent's nightmare, but for a single woman working as a nanny, it represented something even more terrifying: the systematic destruction of everything she'd worked to build. She'd seen it happen before, watched other caregivers be painted as threats to the children they loved, their relationships with families severed by official intervention. On what grounds, she managed to ask, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Anonymous tip about inappropriate relationships between household staff and the employer, potential endangerment of minors due to unstable adult relationships in the home. Daniel's voice was bitter with controlled fury. "Clara's final gift to our family." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of helplessness settle over her. Clara had played her hand perfectly, using the very system designed to protect children as a weapon to destroy the woman who'd brought healing to their lives. It was diabolical in its effectiveness, because any attempt to fight back would be seen as resistance to child welfare concerns. "What do they want?" Emily asked, though she dreaded the answer. To interview the children separately, inspect the household for signs of inappropriate behavior or neglect, and speak with all adult residents about the nature of their relationships. Daniel reached out to touch her face gently. "Emily, I need you to know whatever happens next, Whatever they say or accuse you of, I believe in you. I believe in us." The tenderness in his voice nearly broke her resolve. Emily wanted nothing more than to sink into his comfort, to let him shield her from the storm that was about to break over their heads. But she'd learned long ago that love wasn't always enough to protect against institutional power. And CPS investigations had a way of turning innocent relationships into something sordid and suspicious. "The boys can't see me during this," she said quietly, hating the words even as she spoke them. "If there's any suggestion that my presence is disruptive or inappropriate, it could hurt their case." "Emily, no." "Yes," she interrupted firmly. "Daniel, think about this logically. A single woman living in the home of a wealthy widower, rumors of romantic involvement, accusations of boundary violations. It's exactly the kind of situation that raises red flags for child welfare investigators." She could see him wanting to argue, wanting to fight for what they'd found together. But she could also see, the moment reality set in, the recognition that protecting his children had to come before protecting their relationship. "This is temporary," he said fiercely. "Whatever happens tonight, this is temporary. Clara might have won this battle, but she hasn't won the war." Emily managed a weak smile, touched by his determination, even as her heart broke. "Wake the boys gently. Explain that some people need to talk with them about family things, but that they haven't done anything wrong. Keep it simple." "Where will you go?" The question hung between them, highlighting the cruel reality of her situation. She had no family in New York, no network of friends to provide shelter. Her entire life had become centered around this family, this home, these relationships that were now being systematically dismantled. "Margaret offered to let me stay in her apartment until this gets sorted out," Emily said, grateful that the longtime housekeeper had quietly made the suggestion during Daniel's security calls. "It's not far, and it keeps me close enough to help if you need me." Daniel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to help them understand why the person they love most is suddenly gone." Emily felt her own tears threatening to spill over. "You tell them the truth that sometimes adults have to deal with complicated problems, but that love doesn't disappear just because people can't be in the same place for a while." Luke stirred again, this time waking fully, as adult voices penetrated his drowsy consciousness. He sat up slowly, blinking in confusion, as he tried to understand why his favorite grown-ups looked so sad. "Why are you crying?" he asked Emily, his small hand reaching up to touch her face. Emily captured his hand and kissed his palm, memorizing the feeling of his trust before she had to give it up. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're proud of how brave and wonderful their children are." "Are we brave and wonderful?" Mason asked, having woken during the conversation. "The bravest and most wonderful boys in the whole world," Emily assured him, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan sat up last, his older soul immediately sensing the gravity of the situation. "Something bad is happening, isn't it?" Emily and Daniel exchanged glances, both recognizing that their eldest son was too perceptive to fool with platitudes. He deserved as much truth as his young heart could handle. "Some people are coming to talk with you boys about your family," Daniel explained carefully. "They want to make sure you're happy and safe and getting everything you need." "But we are happy and safe," Ethan protested, his protective instincts kicking in. "Miss Emily takes good care of us." "I know she does," Daniel said softly. "But sometimes official people need to check on families just to be sure. It's not because anyone did anything wrong. It's just something that happens sometimes." "Will Miss Emily be here when they come?" Luke asked, his anxiety evident in the way he clutched at Emily's hand. Emily felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "I'm going to stay with Miss Margaret for a few days while the official people do their checking. but I'll be very close by and I'll see you again soon." "Why can't you stay here?" Mason demanded, his 5-year-old sense of justice rebelling against the arbitrary separation. "Because sometimes grown-ups have to follow rules that don't make sense to children," Emily explained, hating every word. "But the love between us doesn't change no matter where we are." The boys absorbed this with the resigned acceptance children developed when the adult world proved incomprehensible, yet immutable. Emily could see them retreating into the protective shell they'd worn for months after their mother's death, their joy dimming as uncertainty crept back into their lives. "Can we have a group hug before you go?" Ethan asked quietly. Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. All 4 of them came together in the center of their blanket, fort arms wrapped around each other in a tangle of love and desperation. Emily tried to memorize everything: the smell of their hair, the sound of their breathing, the feeling of small hearts beating against her chest. "I love you, boys," she whispered fiercely. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, I love you with my whole heart." "We love you too, Miss Emily," they chorused, their voices small but certain. Daniel's arms tightened around all of them, and Emily felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "This isn't goodbye," he murmured. "This is just, see you soon." Emily wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that sometimes "see you soon" became "never again" when powerful forces decided to reshape lives according to their own agendas. Still, for the boys' sake, she managed to smile as she extracted herself from their embrace. "Miss Margaret is waiting for me," she said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "You boys be good for your daddy and answer the visitors' questions honestly. Remember, you haven't done anything wrong." She gathered her few personal belongings, quickly avoiding the boys' eyes as she moved through the penthouse that had become home. Margaret waited by the service elevator, her weathered face creased with sympathy and righteous anger. "This is wrong," the housekeeper muttered as they descended toward her small apartment on the building's 20th floor. "Those children need you. Anyone with eyes can see how much good you've done for this family." Emily appreciated the support, but she also knew that institutional investigations rarely concerned themselves with emotional bonds or family happiness. They focused on compliance with regulations, adherence to proper boundaries, elimination of potential risks. By those standards, her relationship with Daniel made her a liability rather than an asset. Margaret's apartment was small but cozy, decorated with decades of collected memories from her service with the Lawson family. Photos of Daniel at various ages lined the mantelpiece, including several of him with Victoria and the boys during happier times. Emily settled onto the small sofa, surrounded by visual reminders of the family she was being forced to leave behind. "They'll see through Clara's lies," Margaret said firmly, bustling around the kitchen to prepare tea. "Mr. Daniel won't let them take you away from those boys." Emily wished she shared Margaret's confidence, but she'd learned that love and determination weren't always enough to overcome systemic bias and institutional power. Still, she let the older woman's faith comfort her as they waited for news from upstairs. The call came 2 hours later. Daniel's voice was carefully controlled, but Emily could hear the exhaustion beneath his professional tone. "They're gone," he reported. "The boys were perfect, honest, articulate, clearly well cared for. The investigators found no signs of neglect or inappropriate behavior." Emily felt a rush of relief. "So I can come back." The pause that followed told her everything she needed to know before Daniel spoke the words. "There's a temporary restraining order," he said quietly. "Clara filed for it this afternoon, claiming you pose a threat to child welfare due to your history and your inappropriate relationship with me. It prevents you from having contact with the boys until there's a full hearing." Emily felt the world tilt around her. How long? 2 weeks minimum. Could be longer if she presents compelling evidence at the hearing. 2 weeks might as well have been 2 years from a 5-year-old's perspective. By the time the legal system finished its deliberations, the boys would have retreated back into their shells, their trust shattered by another abandonment they couldn't understand. "Daniel," she said carefully, "you have to let me go." "What do you mean?" "I mean you have to stop fighting for me and focus on protecting them. Clara knows exactly what she's doing every day. This drags out every legal battle you fight on my behalf. It creates more instability for the boys." "Emily, no. Yes." She interrupted, her voice growing stronger as awful clarity set in. "This is what she wanted all along. Not just to get rid of me, but to trap you in a situation where fighting for our relationship means putting your children at risk." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Emily could practically hear him working through the implications. As a businessman, he understood strategic thinking and long-term consequences. As a father, he would always choose his children's welfare over his own happiness. "There has to be another way," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe there is," Emily agreed. "But we can't find it while the boys are caught in the middle of a legal war. They need stability and security, not adults fighting over their future." "So what are you saying?" Emily closed her eyes, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside herself. "I'm saying I resign. Effective immediately. I'll withdraw any claim to continued employment which should satisfy the restraining order and remove the boys from the center of this conflict." "And us, what about us?" The question broke her heart all over again. "There is no us if there are no boys. They were the reason I came into your life, and they have to be the reason I choose to step back." "This is exactly what Clara wanted," Daniel said bitterly. "Yes, it is, and she's going to get it, because the alternative is watching 3 children suffer while the adults in their lives wage war over principles." Emily wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go. Daniel was quiet for a long time, wrestling with the impossible choice between protecting his children and fighting for the woman who'd brought healing to their lives. Emily understood his struggle because she was facing the same decision from the other side. "If I do this," he said finally, "if I let you walk away, how do I explain to my sons that the person they love most chose to abandon them?" "You tell them the truth," Emily said softly. "That sometimes people have to make hard choices to protect the ones they love. That sacrifice isn't abandonment, it's the highest form of care. They won't understand. Not now. But someday they will. And someday, when they're old enough to understand the whole story, they'll know that every choice I made was about loving them enough to put their needs first." Another long pause, then Daniel's voice rough with emotion. "How do I do this? How do I go back to being their father without you there to show me how?" Emily thought about the man she'd fallen in love with, brilliant and successful, but wounded by loss, afraid to fully engage with his children, because vulnerability meant risking more pain. She thought about the progress he'd made, the moments of connection and joy she'd witnessed between him and his sons. "You remember that they need their father, not a perfect parent," she said gently. "You remember that love is more important than protection, that they'd rather have you present and imperfect than distant and safe. What about you? Where will you go?" Emily looked around Margaret's small apartment, thinking about the few belongings she'd accumulated during her brief time as part of Daniel's family. "I'll figure something out. I always do." "Emily." Daniel's voice was urgent now, as if he was afraid she might disappear completely. "This isn't over. Once the legal situation is resolved, once the boys are safe from all this chaos." "Daniel, stop," Emily interrupted gently. "You're a billionaire CEO with 3 children who need their father's full attention. I'm a woman with a complicated past and no real place in your world. Maybe this is the universe's way of preventing a mistake before it goes too far. You don't believe that. I believe that I love you and those boys too much to let my presence in your lives cause them any more pain. Emily stood up, moving to the window that faced toward the upper floors of the building. Somewhere up there, 3 little boys were probably crying themselves to sleep, confused and heartbroken by another loss they couldn't understand. Take care of them, Daniel. Help them remember how to be happy without me. Emily. She ended the call before he could say anything else, before his voice could weaken her resolve. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the city washed clean under a canopy of stars. Emily pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let herself cry for everything she was losing, the children who'd become her heart. The man who'd shown her love was possible again. The family she'd finally found after years of searching. Margaret appeared beside her with a cup of tea and a box of tissues, her own eyes red with sympathetic tears. "You're doing the right thing," the older woman said quietly. "It's the hardest thing, but it's the right thing." Emily accepted the tea gratefully, letting its warmth chase away some of the chill that had settled deep in her bones. "How do you know?" "Because I've watched Mr. Daniel make hard choices for those boys before, and I've never seen him love anyone the way he loves you. If there's a way to fix this mess, he'll find it. But first, he has to get his children through this crisis." Emily wanted to believe that love would be enough, that somehow they'd find a way back to each other, despite the forces working to keep them apart. But she'd learned not to count on fairy tale endings, especially when real children's lives hung in the balance. Upstairs, she knew Daniel was probably tucking 3 heartbroken boys into bed, trying to find words to explain why the person they'd come to depend on had suddenly vanished from their lives. The thought of their confused tears and unanswered questions nearly brought Emily to her knees. But she'd made her choice. For the first time in her life, she'd chosen love over self-preservation, putting the needs of others before her own desire for happiness. It was the most painful decision she'd ever made, and she wasn't sure she'd survive the aftermath. Still watching the stars emerge one by one in the clearing sky, Emily allowed herself one small hope. Maybe somehow this sacrifice would prove to be not an ending, but a beginning. Maybe love really could find a way to triumph over fear and manipulation and all the forces that tried to keep people apart. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight was for grieving what was lost and gathering strength for whatever came next. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of rebuilding her life once again, carrying the memory of 3 little boys and their father like a light in the darkness of uncertainty. Some loves were worth any sacrifice, and Emily knew without doubt that this family was worth hers. 3 floors below the penthouse, Margaret's small television flickered with late-night programming, providing background noise for Emily's vigil by the window. She'd been standing there for over an hour, watching the city sleep, while her mind raced through everything that had led to this moment. Each decision seemed inevitable in hindsight, links in a chain that had always been destined to end in heartbreak. The soft buzz of Margaret's phone interrupted her brooding. The housekeeper answered with the efficiency of someone accustomed to late-night emergencies, but Emily could hear the concern in her voice even from across the room. "Slow down, Mr. Daniel," Margaret said gently. "What's wrong with Luke?" Emily spun away from the window, her heart immediately racing. She moved closer to Margaret, trying to catch fragments of the conversation that would tell her how serious the situation was. "Has he been running a fever?" Margaret asked, then paused. "And he's asking for her specifically. Oh dear." Emily felt her chest tighten with familiar panic. Luke had been more sensitive than his brothers since Victoria's death, more prone to anxiety and physical symptoms when his emotional world felt unstable. The stress of the CPS visit and her sudden absence could easily trigger the kind of episode that had sent him to the hospital twice in the past year. Margaret caught Emily's eye and nodded toward the phone. "He's asking if you can come up to help with Luke. The boy's worked himself into quite a state." Emily closed her eyes, torn between her protective instincts and the legal reality that constrained her actions. "The restraining order doesn't apply to medical emergencies," Margaret said firmly. "If a child's health is at risk, any reasonable judge would understand the need for appropriate intervention." Emily looked toward the ceiling, imagining Luke's pale face and frightened tears. She thought about Ethan and Mason, probably scared and confused as their little brother spiraled into panic. She thought about Daniel facing his worst nightmare, as a parent his child in distress, and the one person who could help legally forbidden from coming near. "What exactly is happening?" she asked Margaret. The housekeeper relayed the question, then listened intently to Daniel's response. "High fever, difficulty breathing, inconsolable crying. He keeps asking for you, specifically saying he needs Miss Emily to make him feel better." Emily felt her professional training kick in alongside her maternal instincts. Luke's symptoms could indicate anything from a panic attack to a more serious medical condition, but either way, a frightened child needed comfort from the people he trusted most. "Tell Daniel I'm coming up," she said, already moving toward the door. "Emily, dear, are you certain if Clara finds out?" "Clara can go to hell," Emily said with quiet vehemence. "That little boy needs help, and I'm not going to let legal technicalities stop me from giving it to him." The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless, each floor marking her ascent back into the world she'd been forced to leave. Emily tried to prepare herself for whatever she might find, but nothing could have readied her for the scene that greeted her when the doors opened. Daniel stood in the hallway outside the boys' rooms, his hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled from hours of stress. His face lit up with desperate relief when he saw her, and Emily felt her heart clench at the raw vulnerability in his expression. "Thank God," he breathed, reaching for her hands. "I didn't know what else to do. He's asking for you, and nothing I say seems to help." Emily could hear Luke's distressed cries echoing from his bedroom, punctuated by Ethan and Mason's anxious voices trying to comfort their brother. The sound cut through her like a knife, activating every protective instinct she possessed. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, already moving toward the boys' rooms. "About an hour. It started with crying about missing you, then escalated into fever and breathing problems. Dr. Martinez is on his way, but Luke won't let anyone else touch him." Emily entered Luke's bedroom to find organized chaos. The youngest triplet was curled in a ball on his bed, his face flushed with fever, and his breathing rapid and shallow. Ethan sat beside him, rubbing his back with the serious concentration of a big brother trying to fix what he couldn't understand. Mason paced by the window, his nervous energy reminding Emily painfully of his father. "Miss Emily!" Luke's cry was hoarse but filled with desperate relief. He struggled to sit up, reaching for her with trembling arms. Emily was beside him in an instant, gathering his small body against her chest and feeling the heat radiating from his skin. His breathing was definitely labored, though she couldn't immediately determine if it was due to fever anxiety or a combination of both. "I'm here, sweetheart," she murmured, her hand automatically checking his forehead and neck for signs of serious illness. "I'm right here. I thought you were gone forever." Luke sobbed against her shoulder. "I thought you left like Mommy did." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes at the raw pain in his voice. She looked up to find Daniel watching from the doorway, his face creased with guilt and helplessness. This was exactly what they'd both feared, that their adult complications would traumatize children who'd already endured too much loss. "I didn't leave like Mommy did," Emily said firmly, rocking Luke gently. "Mommy went to heaven because her body stopped working. I went downstairs because grown-ups have to follow certain rules sometimes. But I'm still here and I love you just as much as ever." "Then why can't you stay with us?" Ethan asked, his young voice thick with confusion and hurt. Emily looked at the three boys, Luke clinging to her desperately. Ethan trying to be brave while his world crumbled again, Mason fighting tears as he watched his family fall apart. These children deserved better than the chaos adults had brought into their lives. "Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with complicated problems that don't make sense to children," she said carefully. "But love doesn't change just because people can't be in the same place all the time." "It feels like it changes," Mason said quietly, finally abandoning his pacing to climb onto the bed beside them. Emily's heart broke all over again. She wrapped her free arm around Mason, while keeping Luke pressed close against her chest, feeling his breathing gradually slow as her presence calmed his panic. "Can you tell me what happened before Luke got sick?" she asked Ethan, knowing that understanding the emotional trigger would help her address the physical symptoms. "We were in the blanket fort after you left," Ethan explained with painful honesty. "Luke kept asking when you were coming back and Daddy said he didn't know. Then Luke started crying really hard and then he got hot and couldn't breathe good." Emily nodded, recognizing the pattern. Luke had worked himself into a panic attack that triggered a fever response not uncommon in sensitive children facing emotional trauma. The good news was that it wasn't a serious medical emergency. The bad news was that it indicated just how deeply her departure had affected him. "Luke, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me," she said gently, tilting his face up so she could look into his eyes. "Your body is feeling scared and sad, and that's making you sick. But you're going to be okay." "How do you know?" Luke whispered. "Because I know your body and I know your heart, and I know that you're one of the strongest, bravest boys in the whole world." Emily smoothed his hair back from his feverish forehead. "But I need you to help me make you feel better. Can you do that?" Luke nodded weakly, trusting her completely, despite his physical distress. "First, we're going to slow down your breathing. Put your hand on my chest and feel how I breathe." Emily demonstrated the slow, deep breathing pattern she'd learned during her own panic attacks years ago. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, just like me." Luke followed her lead, his small hand warm against her chest as he matched his breathing to hers. Gradually, the rapid, shallow pants gave way to deeper, more controlled breaths. "That's perfect," Emily praised. "Now we're going to tell your body that it's safe. Can you say, 'I am safe' for me?" "I am safe," Luke repeated obediently. "I am loved. I am loved. I am going to be okay. I am going to be okay." As they worked through the calming exercises, Emily became aware of Daniel standing quietly in the doorway, watching her work with his son. There was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken, not just gratitude or relief, but a deeper recognition of what they were witnessing together. Dr. Martinez arrived as Luke's fever was beginning to break his breathing, returning to normal as the panic subsided. The elderly physician conducted his examination with gentle efficiency, confirming Emily's assessment that the episode had been primarily anxiety-induced rather than a sign of serious illness. "The fever should continue to drop over the next hour," he told Daniel quietly. "But I'm more concerned about the underlying emotional distress that triggered this episode." Emily felt the weight of guilt settle on her shoulders. Her presence in their lives had brought healing, but her forced departure was causing exactly the kind of trauma she'd hoped to prevent. "Doctor," she said carefully, "would it be medically advisable for me to stay until Luke is fully stable, just to prevent another episode?" Dr. Martinez looked between Emily and Daniel, clearly understanding the larger situation at play. "In my professional opinion, yes. This child's emotional regulation is closely tied to his sense of security with his primary caregivers. Disrupting that relationship abruptly could have serious health consequences." Emily felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. If Dr. Martinez was willing to provide medical justification for her presence, it might override the restraining order temporarily, but it would also mean prolonging the agony for everyone involved. "How long would you recommend?" Daniel asked. "Until the child demonstrates stable emotional regulation without symptoms of anxiety or panic. Could be hours, could be days." Dr. Martinez packed up his medical bag with deliberate care. "Of course, that's purely a medical recommendation. Legal considerations are outside my area of expertise." Emily understood the subtext. The doctor was giving them cover to do what was best for Luke's health, regardless of the complications it might create with Clara's legal maneuvering. After Dr. Martinez left, Emily found herself alone with Daniel and the boys, for the first time since the CPS visit. The artificial distance she'd tried to maintain felt impossible to sustain when faced with Luke's continued need for comfort and his brother's obvious distress. "Can you stay tonight?" Ethan asked quietly. "Just until Luke feels better." Emily looked at Daniel, seeing her own conflict reflected in his eyes. They both knew that staying would complicate everything, but they also knew that leaving would traumatize a child who was already barely holding himself together. "I can stay on the couch in the family room," Emily said carefully. "That way I'm close if Luke needs me, but I'm not overstepping any boundaries." Daniel nodded gratefully. "I think that's best for everyone." As they settled the boys back into their beds, Emily felt the bitter sweetness of being exactly where she belonged, while knowing it couldn't last. Luke's breathing had returned to normal, his fever was breaking, and his brothers were finally relaxing enough to consider sleep. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new reasons why their makeshift family couldn't survive in the real world. "Miss Emily," Luke's voice was drowsy but still anxious. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" Emily looked at Daniel, seeking guidance about how much truth a sick 5-year-old could handle. His slight nod gave her permission to offer the comfort Luke needed. "I'll be here as long as you need me to be," she promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. As the boys finally drifted off to sleep, Emily made her way to the family room couch, wrapping herself in the same blanket they'd used for their fort earlier that evening. Daniel followed, settling into the chair across from her, with the careful distance that had become necessary in their complicated situation. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming back, for helping him, for putting his needs first, even when it costs you." Emily pulled the blanket tighter around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "It's what any parent would do." "You're not his parent," Daniel pointed out gently. "You're his nanny, or were his nanny, or—" He trailed off, clearly struggling with how to define her role in their lives. "I'm someone who loves him," Emily said simply. "That's the only definition that matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts about the impossible situation they faced. Emily found herself memorizing the details of the family room, the way moonlight streamed through the windows, the lingering scent of their earlier hot chocolate, the photos of happier times that lined the mantelpiece. "Emily," Daniel said, eventually his voice soft but urgent. "I need you to know that I'm going to fight this. Not just the restraining order, but all of it. Clara's accusations, the investigation, the whole attempt to drive you away from us. Emily felt her heart constrict with hope and fear in equal measure. Daniel, you can't. The boys need you, he interrupted firmly. Tonight proved that beyond any doubt. Luke's health depends on your presence in his life, and I won't let Clara's vindictiveness destroy what we've built together. And if fighting for me means prolonging their trauma, if it means months of legal battles and uncertainty while they watch the adults in their lives wage war over their future. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the same impossible choices that kept Emily awake at night. Then we find another way. But Emily, I won't accept that love loses. I won't accept that manipulation and fear get to win just because they're easier to fight than truth and healing. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the pull of his determination, warring with her practical understanding of how these battles usually ended. She wanted to believe that love could conquer institutional bias and legal maneuvering, but experience had taught her to be cautious about hope. What if there is no other way? She asked quietly. What if Clara's strategy works, and fighting back only makes things worse for everyone? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Daniel said firmly. But I won't give up without trying everything possible to keep our family together. Our family. The words sent warmth flooding through Emily's chest, despite all her fears about the future. Whatever happened with courts and lawyers and vindictive former employees, she would always have this moment, the knowledge that she'd found her place in the world, even if she couldn't keep it. I love you, she whispered the words carrying all the hope and heartbreak of their impossible situation. I love you too, Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. And tomorrow we start fighting for what that means. Outside, the city continued its restless sleep, unaware that 3 floors above the street, 2 people were falling in love, while their world fell apart around them. But in the quiet sanctuary of their shared vigil, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love really could find a way to win. After all, some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds, and some families were worth any sacrifice required to protect them. The battle Emily had dreaded began at dawn, arriving with the precision of military strike. She woke to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently against the coffee table, Margaret's anxious voice cutting through the early morning quiet like a blade. Emily, dear, you need to see the news, Margaret whispered urgently from her apartment downstairs. They're saying terrible things. Lies, all of them, but people will believe anything when it's printed in black and white. Emily fumbled for the television remote, with hands that suddenly felt numb. The morning news program filled the screen, and her heart stopped as she saw her own photograph displayed beside the anchor's perfectly coiffed head. It was an old picture from Charleston, taken during happier times, when she'd believed the world was fundamentally fair. Scandal rocks Manhattan's elite as billionaire tech mogul Daniel Lawson faces allegations of inappropriate conduct with household staff. The anchor intoned with the practiced gravity reserved for human tragedy turned entertainment. Sources close to the family report a pattern of boundary violations and questionable judgment involving the care of his 3 young sons. Emily felt the room tilt around her as the story unfolded with devastating precision. Clara had clearly spent months preparing her assault-gathering documentation and cultivating sources willing to speak anonymously about the concerning atmosphere in the Lawson household. Every kindness Daniel had shown her, every moment of inclusion in family life, was twisted into evidence of impropriety. The boys' voices drifted down from upstairs, Ethan reading aloud to his brothers, their morning routine proceeding with the resilient normalcy of children adapting to crisis. Emily's heart clenched as she realized They would soon face a world where their father was portrayed as a predator and the woman they loved was painted as a manipulative opportunist. Daniel appeared in the family room doorway, his face ashen as he clutched his own phone. "How bad is it?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "Bad," Emily admitted, gesturing toward the television, where expert commentators were now dissecting the troubling pattern of wealthy men exploiting vulnerable women in caregiving positions. "Clara planned this perfectly. She's not just trying to destroy me, she's trying to destroy you too." "The boys can't go to school today," Emily finished, "or anywhere public until this dies down." Daniel sank into the chair across from her, his powerful frame seeming to diminish under the weight of what they were facing. "My lawyers are already working on damage control, but Emily, once this kind of story takes hold, it takes on a life of its own," she said quietly. "I know. I've been here before." They sat in grim silence as the news program transitioned to other stories, leaving their personal catastrophe to echo through social media and gossip columns like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Emily understood with painful clarity that Clara had chosen the perfect weapon, public humiliation, that would make fighting back almost impossible without seeming to confirm the very accusations they were trying to refute. "Daddy!" Luke's voice carried down from the top of the stairs, uncertain and frightened. "Why are there people with cameras outside our building?" Emily and Daniel exchanged glances of mutual dread. The media circus had arrived faster than either of them had anticipated, which meant the boys were now effectively prisoners in their own home. "Stay upstairs for now, buddy," Daniel called back, his voice carefully controlled. "We'll explain everything in a few minutes." But before either of them could move, the sound of the private elevator arriving sent them both into high alert. Daniel's face darkened as he recognized the voice calling out from the foyer, his mother-in-law, Patricia Lawson Hunt, whose arrival never boded well for anyone involved. Emily had never met Victoria's mother, but she'd heard enough stories to know that the elegant society matriarch viewed most people as either useful tools or potential threats. Given the morning's developments, Emily suspected she fell firmly into the latter category. "Daniel?" Patricia's voice carried the imperious tone of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I demand to know what's happening to my grandsons." Emily started to retreat toward the back hallway, but Daniel caught her hand. "Stay," he said firmly. "Whatever she has to say, she can say it in front of both of us." Patricia Lawson Hunt swept into the family room, like an avenging angel dressed in Chanel, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, despite the early hour, and her blue eyes blazing with righteous fury. She was elegant and intimidating in the way that only old money could produce, and her gaze fixed on Emily with laser-like intensity. "So you're the little gold digger who's been corrupting my daughter's family," Patricia said, with the casual cruelty that passed for directness among the wealthy elite. Emily felt her spine straighten despite the exhaustion and fear weighing on her shoulders. She'd faced down vindictive society women before, and she wasn't about to cower now, especially not in front of the children who might overhear this conversation. "I'm Emily Carter," she replied evenly. "I've been caring for your grandsons for the past month." "Caring for them?" Patricia laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "Is that what you call seducing their father while they're grieving their mother's death?" "Patricia, that's enough." Daniel's voice carried a warning that most people were smart enough to heed. But Patricia had spent decades perfecting the art of emotional manipulation, and she wasn't finished with her assault. "Those boys have been through enough trauma without watching their father make a fool of himself over some opportunistic nobody who preys on vulnerable widowers." Emily felt the familiar burn of shame and anger that came with being dismissed and diminished by people who viewed her as inherently less worthy of respect. But this time, instead of retreating, she found herself stepping forward. "Mrs. Lawson Hunt," she said quietly, "I understand you're concerned about your grandson's welfare. I share that concern, but I won't stand here and let you speak about me or their father in ways that could damage their sense of security." Patricia's eyebrows rose in surprise. Clearly, she hadn't expected resistance from someone she'd already categorized as beneath her notice. "Security?" Patricia scoffed. "What security do you think they have when their father's name is being dragged through every tabloid in the city? When photographers are camped outside their home because he couldn't keep his hands off the help?" The words hit their target with surgical precision, but Emily refused to flinch. They have the security of knowing they're loved by people who put their needs first. They have the security of a father who's learning to choose joy over grief, and caregivers who see them as wonderful children rather than tragic victims. Caregivers? Patricia's voice dripped with disdain. "You mean employees? Hired help who can be dismissed when they overstep their bounds?" "I mean family," Emily said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "I mean people who love those boys enough to fight for their happiness even when it's difficult or inconvenient." Patricia turned to Daniel with an expression of wounded betrayal. "Victoria would be heartbroken to see what you've allowed to happen to her children. She trusted you to protect them, not expose them to this kind of scandal." Emily saw Daniel flinch, as if he'd been struck, and she felt her protective instincts flare to life. Patricia was using his grief and guilt as weapons, attacking the very progress he'd made in learning to be present for his children. Victoria would be heartbroken to see her sons retreating into themselves because the adults around them were too afraid to love again, Emily said before Daniel could respond. She would be devastated to know that fear of judgment was keeping her husband from being the father those boys deserve. "How dare you presume to know what my daughter would want?" Patricia's composure cracked slightly, revealing the raw grief beneath her polished exterior. Emily felt a sudden surge of sympathy for this woman, who was clearly fighting her own battle with loss and powerlessness. "I don't presume to know Victoria's thoughts, but I know her children, and I know they're desperate to see their father smile again. They need him to model how to choose love over fear, how to build new happiness without forgetting what they've lost." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of the boys' voices upstairs, their innocent chatter a stark contrast to the emotional battlefield below. Emily could see Daniel struggling with conflicting loyalties, his desire to defend what they'd built together, warring with his lifelong habit of deferring to his mother-in-law's judgment. "Mrs. Lawson Hunt," Emily said more gently, "I know you love those boys. I know you want what's best for them. So do I. So does their father. Maybe instead of fighting each other, we should focus on protecting them from the chaos that's trying to tear their world apart." Patricia studied Emily with new interest, clearly reassessing her initial assumptions about the young woman's character and intelligence. "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Emily took a deep breath, knowing she was about to suggest something that might destroy any chance she had of remaining in the boys' lives. "By removing the source of controversy, by ensuring that their father's reputation isn't damaged by his association with me." "Emily, no," Daniel started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I resign my position permanently." She continued, her voice steady despite the breaking of her heart. "I publicly accept responsibility for any inappropriate behavior, real or imagined. I remove myself from their lives completely so that Daniel can focus on rebuilding his reputation, and the boys can move forward without the shadow of scandal following them." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she waited for someone to respond to her sacrifice. She'd just offered to destroy herself to save the family she loved, and the magnitude of that decision left her feeling hollow and strangely peaceful. "That's remarkably noble," Patricia said finally, her tone considerably warmer than it had been moments before. "But also remarkably stupid." Emily blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, my dear girl." Patricia continued, moving to settle into one of the elegant chairs with practiced grace. "If you think sacrificial martyrdom is going to solve this problem, you clearly don't understand how these situations actually work." "I don't follow." Patricia smiled, and for the first time Emily caught a glimpse of the woman who had raised Victoria and commanded respect in some of the most exclusive circles in New York. "Clara Whitmore has been planning this attack for months. She's not interested in your resignation or your public apology. She wants complete and total destruction of everything connected to this family's happiness." "But if I'm gone, she'll find new targets," Patricia interrupted. "She'll go after Daniel's business relationships, his custody of the boys, his standing in the community. She'll turn those children into weapons against their own father, and she won't stop until she's destroyed everything Victoria built here." Emily felt a chill of understanding. "So what are you suggesting?" Patricia's smile became predatory. "I'm suggesting we stop playing defense and start playing offense. I'm suggesting we remind Clara Whitmore exactly who she chose to make an enemy of." Daniel leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Mother Patricia, what do you have in mind?" "I have in mind using every resource at our disposal to investigate Mrs. Whitmore's background as thoroughly as she investigated Miss Carter's. I have in mind using my social connections to ensure that her accusations are viewed with appropriate skepticism. And I have in mind making it very clear that attacking this family was the biggest mistake of her miserable life." Emily stared at the older woman, struggling to reconcile this strategic powerhouse with the grieving mother who had walked into the room minutes earlier. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Because I've spent the last month watching my grandsons through various sources, neighbors, teachers, family, friends. And do you know what every single one of them has told me?" Emily shook her head, afraid to hope. "They've told me that those boys are happy again. They're laughing, playing, engaging with the world around them, instead of simply surviving it. They've told me that Daniel is present in ways he hasn't been since Victoria died." Patricia's voice grew thick with emotion. "Whatever you've done in this house, whatever magic you've worked with my family, it's given me back my grandsons. And I'll be damned if I let some vindictive servant destroy that." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes at the unexpected support. "Mrs. Lawson Hunt, Patricia," the older woman corrected. "And if we're going to be family, you might as well get used to calling me by my name." "Family," Emily whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Did you think I was blind?" Patricia asked with gentle amusement. "I've seen the way Daniel looks at you, the way those boys light up when you're mentioned. I've seen the effect you've had on all of them. If my son-in-law is foolish enough to let you slip away, then he deserves to lose you." Daniel moved to Emily's side, taking her hand in his. "I don't plan on letting her slip away. I plan on fighting for her, for us, for the family we're building together." "Good," Patricia said briskly, already shifting into strategic mode. "Then here's what we're going to do." What followed was a masterclass in sophisticated warfare, as Patricia laid out a multi-pronged assault on Clara's credibility and motivations. She had contacts at every major news outlet, social connections that could influence public opinion, and private investigators who made Clara's hired gun look like an amateur. "But first," Patricia said, as their planning session concluded, "we need to address the immediate crisis. Those boys need to understand what's happening, and they need to see the adults in their lives united against the forces trying to tear them apart. Emily nodded, steeling herself for what might be the most difficult conversation of her life. How did you explain to children that the adult world was sometimes cruel and unfair, that people they trusted could turn against them, that love wasn't always enough to protect the innocent? They found the boys in Ethan's room, huddled together on his bed with tablets and phones they'd clearly been using to search for information about the morning's events. Their faces were pale with confusion and fear, and Emily's heart broke at the sight of their lost innocence. "Boys," Daniel said gently, settling onto the bed beside them. "We need to talk about what's happening." "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" Luke asked in a small voice. "The people on the news said bad things about you." "Sometimes people say things that aren't true because they're angry or hurt," Daniel explained carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore is upset about losing her job, so she's telling lies to try to make us look bad." "But why would anyone believe lies?" Mason demanded with 5-year-old logic. "Because sometimes lies sound more interesting than the truth," Emily said softly, joining their family circle on the bed. "And because some people like to think the worst about others instead of looking for the good." "Are you going to leave us again?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Emily looked at Daniel, then at Patricia, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. "Not if I can help it. We're going to fight to stay together as a family." "All of us," Luke pressed, needing absolute clarity about his security. "All of us, Patricia said firmly, moving to join them on the increasingly crowded bed. "Including me. I'm not going to let anyone hurt my grandsons or the people they love." The boys absorbed this with the resilience children showed when faced with adult promises backed by obvious commitment. Emily could see them beginning to relax, their natural optimism reasserting itself in the face of unified adult protection. "Can we still have pancakes for breakfast?" Mason asked, his priorities refreshingly straightforward. "We can have anything you want for breakfast." Emily laughed, relief flooding through her at the return of normal childhood concerns. As they made their way downstairs together, a united front against whatever storms might come, Emily's phone began buzzing with calls from reporters seeking comment on the morning's revelations. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the feeling of Luke's small hand in hers and the sound of the boys' renewed laughter. The battle would be long and difficult, she knew. Clara's accusations would have to be systematically refuted. Public opinion would have to be carefully managed, and legal challenges would need to be navigated with precision. But surrounded by the people she'd come to love as family, Emily felt a strength she'd never experienced before. Patricia proved to be a formidable ally, her decades of social warfare providing advantages Emily had never imagined. Within hours, competing narratives began appearing in more reputable outlets, stories about Daniel's business success and philanthropic efforts, testimonials from families who had worked with Emily during her years in childcare, expert commentary on the phenomenon of disgruntled employees making false accusations against wealthy employers. "The tide is turning," Patricia announced during their afternoon strategy session while the boys napped. "Clara's credibility is already being questioned, and I have it on good authority that several of her supposed sources are reconsidering their statements." "What changed their minds?" Daniel asked. Patricia smiled with satisfaction. "Let's just say that people are more willing to tell the truth when they understand the full consequences of lying." Emily didn't ask for details, understanding that some aspects of Patricia's methods were better left unexplored. She was grateful for the older woman's support, but she also recognized that this level of protection came with its own obligations and complications. The real turning point came 3 days later when Dr. Martinez held a press conference at the Children's Hospital, where he served as chief of pediatrics. Standing behind a podium laden with microphones, The respected physician delivered a statement that cut through the media noise with surgical precision. "I have treated the Lawson children since their birth," he said, with quiet authority. "I have observed their development, their response to trauma, and their recent remarkable recovery. Emily Carter's presence in their lives has been nothing short of miraculous from a medical standpoint. These children have healed under her care in ways that no amount of therapy or medication could achieve." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the killing blow. "Any suggestion that Miss Carter represents a threat to these children's welfare is not only false, it's harmful to 3 young patients who have already endured more loss than most adults face in a lifetime." The effect was immediate and devastating to Clara's narrative. Medical authority carried weight that gossip and innuendo could never match, and Dr. Martinez's reputation was beyond reproach. News outlets began walking back their more sensational claims, focusing instead on the complicated dynamics of modern family structures. But the most powerful moment came that evening when the boys themselves decided to take action. Emily found them in the family room, huddled around Ethan's tablet, with expressions of determined concentration. "What are you boys working on?" she asked, settling beside them on the couch. "We're making a video," Ethan announced with the seriousness of a general planning military strategy, "to tell people the truth about our family." "What kind of truth?" Emily asked gently. "That you take good care of us," Luke said firmly. "That Daddy smiles now because you're here. That we're happy and safe and loved." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched these 3 little boys taking on the adult world with nothing but honesty and love as their weapons. "Sweethearts, you don't need to defend us. That's not your job." "But it's not fair," Mason protested. "People are saying mean things that aren't true. We want to tell them what really happened." Daniel appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. "What really happened?" he asked, sitting down beside Emily. "You were sad," Ethan said simply. "Really, really sad after Mommy died. And we were sad too, and angry, and we made all the other nannies go away because they weren't right. But Miss Emily was different," Luke continued the story. "She didn't get scared when we were bad. She helped us build forts and make pancakes and remember how to laugh. And she helped Daddy remember how to hug us," Mason added with devastating honesty. "Before Miss Emily came, Daddy forgot how to be happy with us." Emily looked at Daniel and saw her own emotions reflected in his face: pride in these remarkable children, gratitude for their fierce loyalty, and determination to be worthy of their love. "And now we're a family again," Ethan concluded. "Not the same as before, but good in a new way. Miss Emily didn't take Mommy's place, she just helped us find room in our hearts for more love." The video they created was simple and heartfelt. 3 little boys speaking directly to the camera about their experience with the woman who had brought healing to their lives. They didn't address the accusations or legal complexities, they simply told their truth, with the clarity that only children could achieve. When Daniel's legal team arranged for the video to be released through proper channels, it went viral within hours. The sight of 3 grieving children defending the woman they loved proved more powerful than any carefully crafted public relations campaign. Comment sections filled with messages of support, and even the most cynical reporters found it difficult to maintain their aggressive stance in the face of such innocent honesty. Clara's response was swift and vicious, a final desperate attempt to salvage her narrative by attacking the children themselves. She suggested that the boys had been coached, that their emotional manipulation was evidence of Emily's inappropriate influence over them. It was the mistake Patricia had been waiting for. "No one attacks my grandsons," the elegant matriarch announced grimly. "No one." What followed was the complete and systematic destruction of Clara Whitmore's credibility and future prospects. Patricia's investigators uncovered a pattern of manipulative behavior spanning decades, evidence of financial impropriety in her previous positions, and testimony from other families who had suffered under her vindictive reign. But perhaps most damaging was the revelation that Clara had been embezzling from the Lawson household for years, using her position to systematically steal from a family she had sworn to serve. When presented with irrefutable evidence of her crimes, prosecutors moved quickly to file charges that would ensure she spent years in prison rather than bothering anyone else's family. The legal victory felt hollow to Emily, who took no satisfaction in another person's downfall. But watching the boys return to their normal routines, school playdates, bedtime stories, she felt profound relief that their security had been restored. 2 weeks after Clara's arrest, Daniel found Emily in the family room, where their adventure had begun, reading to the boys in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sight still took his breath away, this woman, who had walked into their lives, carrying her own grief and somehow transformed it into healing for everyone around her. "Boys," he said softly, "could I borrow Miss Emily for a few minutes?" The triplets looked up from their books with expressions of mild curiosity. After everything they'd been through, brief separations no longer triggered panic attacks or abandonment fears. They had learned to trust that the people they loved would return. "Are you going to ask her to marry you?" Luke asked with the straightforward logic of a 5-year-old. Daniel felt his face flush while Emily nearly dropped the book she was holding. "What makes you think that?" he managed to ask. "Because you look at her the same way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in the movie," Ethan explained matter-of-factly. "And because you bought a ring. We saw it in your desk drawer when we were looking for tape." "Were you snooping in Daddy's desk?" Emily asked, trying to recover her composure. "We weren't snooping," Mason protested. "We were exploring. There's a difference." Daniel laughed, despite his nervousness, reminded once again that his sons were far more observant than most adults gave them credit for. "You're right, Luke. I was planning to ask Miss Emily to marry me, but I wanted to ask you boys first, if that would be okay with you." 3 faces lit up with identical expressions of joy and excitement. "Really?" they chorused. "Really? Because if she says yes, she'll officially become your stepmother. That means she'll be part of our family forever, not just while she's working here." "But she's already part of our family," Luke said with confusion. "Love makes people family, not jobs." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple wisdom contained in those words. These children had learned something about the nature of family that many adults never understood, that love, not law or blood or legal documents, was what truly bound people together. "You're absolutely right," Daniel agreed softly. "But sometimes grown-ups like to make love official with ceremonies and rings and promises." "Can we help plan the wedding?" Mason asked excitedly. "Can we wear matching suits? Can we throw flower petals?" Luke added. "I want to throw flower petals." "Boys," Emily interrupted gently. "Your daddy hasn't actually asked me yet. Maybe we should let him do that first." 3 pairs of blue eyes turned expectantly toward their father, who suddenly found himself performing one of the most important moments of his life in front of the world's most demanding audience. Daniel dropped to one knee beside the couch, pulling the ring box from his pocket, with hands that trembled slightly. Emily's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a stunning solitaire that caught the afternoon light and scattered it in rainbow fragments across the room. "Emily Carter," he said formally, his voice rough with emotion, "you walked into our lives when we were broken and angry and lost. You showed us how to be a family again, how to choose joy over grief, how to love without fear. Will you marry me? Will you officially become part of our family forever? Emily looked at this man who had given her everything she'd ever wanted, not just love but belonging, purpose, and the chance to be a mother to 3 extraordinary children. She thought about all the obstacles they'd overcome, all the forces that had tried to tear them apart, all the reasons why this moment should have been impossible. "Yes," she whispered, then louder as joy bubbled up inside her chest. "Yes, Daniel Lawson, I will marry you. I will be part of this family forever." The boys erupted in cheers as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, their excitement drowning out any words the adults might have tried to exchange. Emily found herself buried under 3 small bodies as they launched themselves at her in a group tackle that spoke of pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Can we call you Mom now?" Ethan asked when the initial celebration died down. Emily's throat closed with emotion. "If that's what you want. But you know that doesn't mean I'm trying to replace your first mom, right? It just means you're lucky enough to have 2 moms who love you." "We know," Luke said seriously. "Our first mom lives in our hearts, and our new mom lives in our house. That way we're covered no matter what." Daniel pulled Emily against his side, his arms encompassing all 4 of them in an embrace that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Outside New York continued its relentless pace, but inside their family room, time seemed to slow to match the rhythm of hearts beating in sync. "I love you," Daniel murmured against Emily's hair. "All of you, my whole world." "We love you too, Daddy," the boys chorused. "And I love all of you more than there are stars in the sky," Emily added, using the phrase that had become their family benediction. As afternoon faded into evening, and the boys finally returned to their books, Emily found herself staring at the ring on her finger and marveling at the path that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her daughter Sophie, who would soon gain 3 younger brothers, and a stepfather who understood the complexities of blended families. She thought about Margaret, who had already started planning a celebration dinner. She thought about Patricia, who had proved that sometimes the fiercest protectors came in the most unexpected packages. Most of all, she thought about the children who had taught her that love really could unconquer fear, that families could be built from the broken pieces of other families, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the biggest messes. 6 months later, Emily walked down the aisle of the same cathedral where Daniel and Victoria had been married, carrying a bouquet of white roses mixed with wildflowers the boys had picked themselves. Sophie, radiant in her role as maid of honor, walked beside her new brothers who took their jobs as ring-bearers with the utmost seriousness. The ceremony was simple but elegant, witnessed by friends and family who had supported them through their darkest days and celebrated their journey back to joy. Dr. Martinez gave the blessing, Margaret cried happy tears from the front row, and Patricia beamed with satisfaction at the successful completion of her campaign to secure her grandson's happiness. But the moment that would live forever in Emily's memory came during the reception, when all 4 children, Sophie and the triplets, stood together to toast their new family. "To Emily and Daddy," Ethan said solemnly, raising his glass of sparkling apple cider, "for showing us that love wins, always." "To our family," Sophie added with the wisdom of her 7 years, "which is weird and wonderful and perfect, just the way it is." "To adventures," Mason contributed enthusiastically. "To pancakes," Luke concluded, making everyone laugh. "To love," Daniel said, pulling Emily close as their children giggled around them. "To second chances and new beginnings, and the belief that happiness is always possible if you're brave enough to fight for it." Emily looked around at the faces surrounding her children, who had learned to trust again a man who had chosen love over fear, friends, who had become family, and family who had become friends. The path to this moment had been fraught with obstacles and heartbreak, but every challenge had only strengthened the bonds between them. To home. She whispered the word, encompassing everything they had built together. To finding exactly where we belong. As the celebration continued around them, Emily allowed herself to believe fully in fairy tale endings, not the perfect kind found in storybooks, but the real kind forged through courage, sacrifice, and the unshakable conviction that love, in all its messy and complicated glory, really could conquer all. Some battles were worth fighting, some families were worth every risk, and some loves were powerful enough to transform broken hearts into something beautiful and whole. Looking at her husband's face, hearing her children's laughter, feeling the solid warmth of the life they had built together, Emily knew without doubt that this was one of those loves. And in a penthouse high above Manhattan, where 3 little boys had once driven away every caregiver with their pain and anger, the sound of family laughter echoed through rooms that had learned once again to be home.